Welcome, dear listener, to a journey across time and across a continent whose ancient stories have waited far too long to be told in full. Tonight, as you settle into comfort and allow the weight of the day to lift from your shoulders, we travel together to Africa, not the Africa of modern headlines or familiar stereotypes, but the Africa of great kingdoms, of cities that gleamed with gold, of scholars and traders and architects who built civilizations to rival any the world has known. Let the gentle rhythm of these words carry you like a boat upon a slow river, drifting through millennia of human achievement. There is no need to memorize, no need to take notes, no need to do anything at all except breathe deeply and allow these stories to wash over you like warm rain upon ancient stone. For too long, the history of Africa before European contact was dismissed, ignored, or simply unknown to much of the world. Generations of scholars, influenced by the prejudices of their times, looked upon the magnificent ruins of great Zimbabwe and declared that Africans could not possibly have built them. They gazed upon the wealth of the Kingdom of Mali and attributed it to outside influences. They encountered the sophisticated legal codes of ancient Ghana and assumed they must have been borrowed from elsewhere. But the truth, dear listener, is far more remarkable than these dismissals ever allowed. The truth is that Africa was home to some of humanity's earliest and most enduring civilizations. The truth is that while much of Europe still huddled in the aftermath of Rome's fall, African kingdoms were conducting international trade, building universities, and accumulating wealth that would make medieval European monarchs gasp in disbelief. Tonight, we will walk together through the golden streets of ancient African capitals. We will stand in the shadow of walls built without mortar, yet standing for 1,000 years. We will meet kings whose wealth was so vast that a single journey could crash the economy of an entire region. We will discover scholars whose libraries contained knowledge from across the known world, and traders whose networks stretched from the forests of the Congo to the shores of distant China. But first, let us understand the stage upon which these dramas unfolded. Let us understand Africa itself, its geography, its peoples, its unique position in the story of human civilization. Africa is vast. This simple statement, spoken quickly, barely hints at the reality. The entire continental United States could fit inside Africa with room to spare. You could place China, India, and most of Western Europe within its borders and still have land left over. This immensity means that African history is not one story but hundreds of stories, not one civilization but countless civilizations, each adapted to its particular environment, each developing its own solutions to the challenges of human existence. In the north, the Sahara Desert stretches like a golden sea, seemingly endless, seemingly impassable. Yet this desert, which today appears as one of the world's great barriers, was not always so forbidding. In times long past, the Sahara was green, dotted with lakes and crossed by rivers, home to hippopotamuses and crocodiles, to cattle herders and farmers whose rock art still decorates hidden caves. Even after the desert claimed these lands, it never became the absolute barrier that casual observers might assume. Caravans crossed its expanse, linking the Mediterranean world with the kingdoms of the south. These trade routes became arteries through which wealth, ideas, and people flowed for thousands of years. South of the Sahara lies the Sahel, that band of semi-arid land that transitions from desert to savanna. Here, some of Africa's greatest trading kingdoms arose: Ghana, Mali, Songhai powers that controlled the flow of gold and salt and slaves, that built cities of learning and commerce, that sent ambassadors to distant lands and received visitors from across the known world. Further south still, the savanna gives way to tropical forests, dense and green, home to peoples who developed their own sophisticated cultures, their own systems of government, their own approaches to art and spirituality and social organization. The forests held their own kingdoms: Benin, with its magnificent bronze sculptures, the Congo, whose complex political system impressed the first European visitors. And in the east and south, the landscape rises toward highland plateaus and great rift valleys, toward mountains that catch the clouds and rivers that flow toward distant oceans. Here arose great Zimbabwe and its predecessor and successor states, stone-built civilizations that controlled trade in gold and ivory. that built monuments that still inspire wonder today. Each of these regions developed its own history, its own cultures, its own achievements. Tonight, we cannot tell every story that would take not 3 hours but 300. Instead, we will focus on some of the most remarkable chapters in this vast saga, stories that illuminate the brilliance and creativity of African peoples across the centuries. But before we dive into specific kingdoms and empires, let us take a moment to appreciate something fundamental about African history, its depth. When we speak of ancient civilizations, our minds often turn first to Egypt, to Mesopotamia, to China, to Greece and Rome. These are the civilizations whose stories we learned in school, whose monuments fill our museums, whose influence we recognize in our daily lives. But Africa's story begins even earlier than these familiar tales. Africa is, quite literally, the birthplace of humanity. In the Great Rift Valley of East Africa, our earliest ancestors first walked upright, first crafted tools, first developed the social structures that would eventually lead to civilization itself. Every human being alive today, regardless of where they live or what they look like, can trace their ancestry back to African origins. This is not merely a scientific curiosity. It means that the story of human civilization is, at its root, an African story. The innovations that made civilization possible, language, tool-making, social organization, art, spirituality, all these began in Africa and spread from there to cover the globe. And Africa did not stop innovating once humans began to migrate to other continents. The oldest known mathematical artifacts, notched bones used for counting, come from Africa. The oldest known astronomical observations come from Africa. The techniques of iron smelting may have been independently invented in Africa, and African metallurgists developed methods that in some ways surpassed those of other regions. Yet somehow, this rich heritage was long ignored or denied by scholars from other parts of the world. The reasons for this denial are themselves a story worth understanding, though it is a painful one. When European powers began to colonize Africa in the 19th century, they needed justifications for their conquest. They needed to believe, or at least to claim, that Africans were incapable of governing themselves, incapable of creating civilization, incapable of the achievements that defined civilized peoples. This belief, rooted in racism and the desire for African resources and labor, led to a systematic dismissal of African history and achievements. Monuments like Great Zimbabwe were attributed to Phoenicians, to Arabs, to anyone except the African peoples who had actually built them. African kingdoms were described as primitive or as mere copies of outside influences. African art was dismissed as crude, African philosophy as simple, African religion as mere superstition. Fortunately, this false narrative has been challenged and largely overturned by generations of scholars, both African and non-African, who have worked to uncover the true history of the continent. Archaeological discoveries, careful analysis of oral traditions, study of African languages, and examination of documents in Arabic and other languages have revealed a picture of African history far richer and more complex than the colonial dismissals ever allowed. Tonight, dear listener, we benefit from this scholarship. We can approach African history not as a collection of curiosities or exceptions, but as a central strand in the great tapestry of human civilization. We can appreciate African achievements on their own terms, as expressions of human creativity and ingenuity equal to any the world has produced. As you continue to relax, perhaps feeling the tension leaving your muscles, perhaps noticing your breathing growing slower and deeper, let us begin to focus our attention on the first great theme of tonight's journey: gold. Gold. The word itself seems to glow, does it not? Throughout human history, across virtually every culture, gold has held a special place in human imagination. Its warm color, reminiscent of sunlight, its resistance to tarnish and decay, its malleability and beauty, all these qualities have made gold a symbol of permanence, of divinity, of ultimate value. But gold is not evenly distributed across the earth. Some regions have abundant deposits, others have almost none. And this uneven distribution has shaped history in profound ways, creating trade routes and relationships, building kingdoms and destroying them, driving exploration and conquest. Africa, dear listener, is blessed with some of the richest gold deposits on Earth. The gold fields of West Africa, in regions that would become part of Ghana, Mali, and other kingdoms, produced quantities of gold that staggered the imagination of medieval observers. The gold of Southern Africa, in the regions around Great Zimbabwe, flowed into trade networks that stretched to Arabia, India, and beyond. This gold made African kingdoms wealthy almost beyond comprehension. It attracted traders from across the known world. It built cities and monuments, supported scholars and artists, funded armies and administrations. Understanding African gold, where it came from, how it was extracted, where it went, is essential to understanding African history. But gold was not Africa's only valuable resource. Salt, that humble mineral essential to human life, was equally important in African trade. In the regions south of the Sahara, salt was scarce and precious, sometimes literally worth its weight in gold. Caravans crossed the desert carrying massive slabs of salt from northern mines to southern markets, returning laden with gold, ivory, and other goods. Ivory, too, played a crucial role in African trade. The elephants of Africa provided tusks that were carved into objects of beauty across the medieval world. African ivory found its way to India, to China, to Europe, becoming the raw material for religious objects, luxury goods, and works of art. And then there were the less tangible exports: ideas, technologies, people. Africa traded not just goods but knowledge. African innovations in agriculture, metallurgy, architecture, and other fields spread along trade routes. African scholars studied and taught in distant lands. And, tragically, millions of African people were themselves traded, first across the Sahara and the Indian Ocean, later across the Atlantic, in slave trades that lasted for centuries and left deep scars that persist to this day. But tonight, we focus primarily on the centuries before the Atlantic slave trade reshaped African history, on the era when African kingdoms stood as equals or superiors to the powers of other continents, when African traders and diplomats and scholars moved through the wider world as respected figures, when African civilization flourished in ways that later generations would struggle to imagine. Let us begin with the ancient kingdom that shares its name with a modern nation, yet existed in a different location and a different time: Ghana. In the western reaches of the African Sahel, where the Sahara Desert yields grudgingly to savanna grasslands, there arose one of the earliest and greatest of the West African kingdoms. The people who lived there called their ruler Ghana, a title meaning warrior king, and outsiders eventually applied this name to the kingdom itself. The Kingdom of Ghana, not to be confused with the modern nation of Ghana, which lies far to the south, flourished from roughly the 6th century to the 13th century of the Common Era. At its height, it controlled territory that spanned much of modern-day Mauritania, Mali, and Senegal. It commanded the gold trade of West Africa. It built cities and maintained armies. It impressed visitors from distant lands with its wealth and sophistication. But the kingdom did not appear suddenly, fully formed. Like all great civilizations, it grew over time, building upon the achievements of earlier peoples, adapting to changing circumstances, gradually developing the institutions and practices that would make it powerful. The region that would become Ghana was inhabited long before the kingdom arose. Archaeological evidence reveals settlements dating back thousands of years, communities of farmers and herders who gradually developed the agricultural and pastoral techniques that would support larger populations. These early peoples learned to work iron, a crucial technology that allowed them to clear land, craft tools, and forge weapons. Iron was central to West African development. While some regions of the world received iron technology from outside, West Africa may have developed iron smelting independently. African metallurgists created sophisticated furnaces, developed specialized techniques, and produced iron tools and weapons that supported the growth of complex societies. The peoples of the Ghana region also learned to manage the challenging environment of the Sahel. This transitional zone between desert and savanna offered opportunities but also posed challenges. Rainfall was unpredictable, drought could devastate crops and herds. Success required careful management of water resources, diversified economic strategies, and social organization capable of responding to environmental challenges. Trade, too, was central to the region's development from early times. Even before the Great Kingdom arose, communities in the area participated in exchange networks that stretched across considerable distances. Goods moved from the desert to the forest, from the coast to the interior, along routes that had been traveled for generations. What transformed these communities into a great kingdom was the ability to control and tax the most valuable of these trade routes, the routes that carried gold from the forests to the south toward the markets of North Africa and beyond. The gold of West Africa came primarily from two regions. The first, Bambuk, lay between the Senegal and Falim rivers. The second, Bure, lay near the headwaters of the Niger River. In these regions, gold could be found in alluvial deposits scattered in the beds of streams and rivers, waiting to be panned or collected by patient workers. The process of gold extraction was labor-intensive, but did not require sophisticated technology. Workers would dig pits to reach gold-bearing gravels, then wash the material to separate the heavier gold from the lighter sand and dirt. The gold was then traded, often in the form of dust, to merchants who would carry it northward. The Kingdom of Ghana did not directly control the goldfields themselves. The miners, members of various Man-speaking peoples, maintained their independence and their trade secrets. But Ghana controlled the territory through which the gold had to pass on its way to market. This strategic position allowed Ghanaian rulers to tax the trade, extracting wealth from every caravan that crossed their territory. The taxation system was sophisticated. According to Arab sources, the king of Ghana claimed all nuggets of gold, leaving the gold dust for his subjects. This ensured a steady supply of gold for the royal treasury, while still allowing ordinary traders to profit from the trade. The king also taxed goods coming into the kingdom, salt from the north, luxury goods from distant lands, ensuring that wealth flowed to the royal court from multiple directions. The salt trade was nearly as important as the gold trade. Salt is essential for human survival, particularly in hot climates where people lose salt through sweat. Yet the regions south of the Sahara had few natural sources of salt. The mines of the Sahara, particularly those at Tagaza and later at Taudeni, produced salt in quantities sufficient to supply much of West Africa. Salt was so valuable that it sometimes served as a form of currency. Blocks of salt were cut into standard sizes and traded at fixed rates against gold and other goods. Caravans carrying salt southward might return laden with gold worth many times the weight of their original cargo. The merchants who conducted this trade were primarily Berbers, peoples of North Africa who had converted to Islam and who maintained commercial networks stretching from the Mediterranean to the Sahel. These merchants brought not only goods but also ideas, including the Islamic faith that would gradually spread throughout West Africa. The relationship between Ghana and these Muslim merchants was complex and mutually beneficial. Ghana's rulers were not themselves Muslim during the kingdom's early centuries, but they welcomed Muslim traders, protected them, and employed Muslim officials in their administration. The presence of these merchants connected Ghana to the wider Islamic world, bringing news, technologies, and luxury goods from distant lands. Our most detailed descriptions of Ghana come from Arab geographers and travelers who wrote about the kingdom during its height in the 10th and 11th centuries. Among the most valuable of these accounts is that of al-Bakri, a scholar from Cordoba in Muslim Spain, who wrote a comprehensive geography of Africa and other regions in the year 1067. Al-Bakri never visited Ghana himself, but he gathered information from travelers and merchants who had been there. His account provides a vivid picture of Ghana at the peak of its power. According to al-Bakri, the capital of Ghana consisted of two towns 6 miles apart. One town was inhabited by Muslims, merchants, scholars, and officials who had settled in the kingdom. This Muslim town had 12 mosques, places of worship where the faithful gathered for daily prayers and Friday sermons. It had scholars who taught Islamic law and theology. It had wells and gardens that provided water and shade in the hot Sahelian climate. The other town was the royal residence, where the King of Ghana held court. This town was surrounded by a wall and contained the palace complex, sacred groves where traditional religious ceremonies took place, and the prison where captives were held. Unlike the Muslim town, this royal town remained devoted to traditional African religious practices. Between and around these two towns lived the general population: farmers, craftsmen, ordinary traders in houses built of stone and wood. The entire urban complex represented one of the great cities of the medieval world, a center of commerce, government, and culture that impressed visitors with its size and sophistication. The King of Ghana, as described by al-Bakri, was a figure of immense power and wealth. He held audiences in a pavilion surrounded by pages bearing gold-mounted swords and shields. Behind him stood the sons of vassal kings, their hair braided with gold. Ministers and officials, horses and dogs adorned with precious metals, all contributed to a display of magnificence designed to overawe visitors and reinforce the king's authority. The administration of the kingdom was surprisingly sophisticated. The king maintained an army, reportedly numbering 200,000 warriors. Though this figure may be exaggerated, he employed officials to collect taxes, administer justice, and manage the complex logistics of trans-Saharan trade. He maintained diplomatic relations with distant powers and received ambassadors from across the Islamic world. Justice in Ghana was administered through a combination of traditional practices and careful investigation. According to al-Bakri, when a man was accused of denying a debt or shedding blood, he might be required to drink a sour beverage made from wood and water. If he vomited, he was declared innocent. If he did not vomit and became ill, he was declared guilty. This ordeal, similar to practices found in many traditional societies, reflected beliefs about the supernatural detection of truth. The wealth of Ghana's kings was legendary. Gold was so abundant that the king reportedly tied his horse to a nugget of gold weighing 30 pounds. The royal treasury accumulated vast quantities of precious metals. When a king died, an enormous dome was built over his tomb, and he was buried with his ornaments, his weapons, and his food and drink vessels, along with servants who were believed to serve him in the afterlife. This last detail reminds us that Ghana, like all ancient societies, had practices that modern sensibilities find troubling. Slavery existed in Ghana, as it did throughout the medieval world. Human sacrifice, while not an everyday occurrence, was practiced on certain occasions. We must understand these practices in their historical context while acknowledging that they caused real suffering. The religion of Ghana's rulers, during the kingdom's classical period, centered on traditional African beliefs. A sacred grove near the royal town served as the spiritual center of the kingdom. Priests maintained shrines, conducted rituals, and interpreted signs from the spirit world. The king himself was believed to have spiritual powers, connecting the human world with the divine. At the same time, Islam was making gradual inroads. Muslim merchants and scholars were not merely tolerated but welcomed. Some members of the court converted to Islam. The king employed Muslims as translators, scribes, and advisors, taking advantage of their literacy and their connections to the wider Islamic world. This dual religious character, traditional African beliefs at the court, Islam among the merchants, would characterize many West African kingdoms for centuries to come. Rather than sudden conversion, Islam spread gradually through West Africa, often adapting to local conditions and coexisting with traditional practices. The economic system of Ghana was equally sophisticated. Beyond the gold and salt trade, the kingdom produced and traded a variety of goods. Copper from the Sahara was worked into ornaments and utensils. Cotton cloth, some of it dyed with indigo, was produced and traded. Leather goods from Ghana were renowned throughout North Africa. Moroccan leather was often actually produced in Ghana and merely finished in Morocco. Agriculture, while challenging in the Sahelian environment, supported the kingdom's population. Millet and sorghum, drought-resistant grains, were the staples. Cattle, sheep, and goats provided meat, milk, and hides. Along rivers and in areas with more reliable rainfall, farmers grew vegetables and other crops. The combination of agriculture, pastoralism, and trade created an economy resilient enough to support a powerful kingdom. The Kingdom of Ghana reached its peak in the 10th and 11th centuries, but it would not last forever. Various factors contributed to its decline. The Almoravid movement, a reformist Islamic movement from Morocco, launched attacks on Ghana in the late 11th century. Whether the Almoravids actually conquered Ghana or merely disrupted its trade routes remains debated by historians, but the kingdom certainly weakened. Environmental changes may also have played a role. The Sahara was slowly expanding, pushing the boundary between desert and savanna further south. Trade routes shifted as merchants sought new paths and new partners. New powers arose to challenge Ghana's dominance. By the 13th century, Ghana had fragmented into smaller states, its once great capital reduced to a regional town. But its legacy lived on. The patterns of trade, governance, and cultural exchange that Ghana had established would be inherited by its successors. The great kingdoms that followed Mali, Songhai built upon foundations that Ghana had laid. And so, dear listener, as you perhaps feel yourself sinking deeper into relaxation, let us carry these images with us. The twin towns of Ghana's capital, one Muslim and one traditional, side by side. The king in his pavilion, surrounded by gold and majesty. The caravans crossing the desert, laden with salt and gold and dreams of wealth. These images represent not just one kingdom, but a pattern of West African civilization that would persist and evolve for centuries to come. Let us rest here for a moment, in the dying days of ancient Ghana, before we journey onward to its even greater successor, the legendary Empire of Mali. Before we continue our journey through the great kingdoms of West Africa, let us pause to appreciate one of the most important geographical features in African history, the Niger River. The Niger is one of the world's great rivers, the third longest in Africa after the Nile and the Congo. It rises in the highlands of Guinea, not far from the Atlantic coast, and flows northeast into the heart of West Africa. Then, in one of geography's great surprises, it curves dramatically, bending southward and eventually emptying into the Gulf of Guinea thousands of miles from its source. This great bend of the Niger has shaped West African history for millennia. The river provided water in a region where water was precious. It supported agriculture along its banks and in its floodplains. It offered a highway for trade, a means of transportation far easier than overland travel. And it created a geographical focal point where peoples and cultures met, mixed, and created something new. Along the Niger arose some of Africa's greatest cities. Timbuktu, whose very name would become synonymous with remoteness and mystery, sits near the river's great bend. Gao, which would become the capital of the Songhai Empire, stands on the Niger's banks. Djenné, one of the oldest cities in sub-Saharan Africa, rises from the floodplain where the Niger meets the Bani River. The ecology of the Niger River region is complex and varied. In the north, where the river curves closest to the Sahara, the land is dry, receiving minimal rainfall. Yet the river itself provides moisture, supporting ribbons of green along its banks even in the driest regions. This contrast between desert and river made the Niger Valley a natural corridor for trade, a place where goods from the Sahara could meet goods from the wetter lands to the south. Further south, rainfall increases, and the landscape transitions from Sahel to savanna to forest. The Niger's inland delta, a vast area where the river spreads across the land during annual floods, creates some of Africa's most fertile agricultural land. Here, farmers have practiced flood recession agriculture for thousands of years, planting as the waters retreat and harvesting before the next flood arrives. The peoples of the Niger region developed sophisticated techniques for exploiting the river's resources. Fishing communities, such as the Bozo and Simono peoples, developed specialized knowledge of the river's rhythms and the habits of its fish. They built distinctive boats, crafted nets and traps, and organized their societies around the demands of river life. The fish they caught were not only eaten locally, but also dried and traded far inland, providing protein to populations who lived far from the river. This fish trade was one of many connections, linking the Niger Valley to distant regions. The river also facilitated the movement of people and ideas. A trader or a scholar could travel by boat, from Djenné to Timbuktu to Gao, moving through the heartland of West African civilization, without the difficulties of overland travel. This ease of movement helped create a degree of cultural unity across the region, as languages, religions, and customs spread along the river's course. Iron Age peoples settled along the Niger thousands of years ago, and some of the earliest complex societies in West Africa developed in the river valley. Archaeological excavations at sites like Djenné-Djinno, the ancient predecessor to modern Djenné, have revealed that urban life along the Niger began as early as the 3rd century BCE, making these cities contemporary with ancient Rome and older than many European capitals. Djenné-Djinno, in particular, has transformed scholarly understanding of African history. Before its excavation, many historians assumed that urbanism in West Africa was a relatively late development, perhaps influenced by contact with North Africa or the Middle East. But Djenné-Djinno shows that West Africans were building cities, developing crafts, and engaging in long-distance trade long before significant outside contact. The city grew organically over centuries, eventually covering an area of over 80 acres. Its inhabitants worked iron, produced pottery and other crafts, and traded with distant regions. They lived in houses of mud brick, clustered in neighborhoods that may have reflected occupational or ethnic divisions. At its peak, Djenné-Djinno may have housed tens of thousands of people. What is remarkable about Djenné-Djinno is what it lacked. There are no signs of monumental architecture, no palaces or temples dominating the cityscape, no evidence of the stark social stratification that characterized many ancient cities. This suggests that early urban life along the Niger may have been organized differently from the hierarchical model familiar from other regions, a reminder that human societies have found many different paths to complexity and prosperity. The original city of Djenné-Djinno was eventually abandoned as its population moved to a nearby site, the modern city of Djenné. This new city would become famous for its great mosque, one of the largest mud brick structures in the world, a masterpiece of Sudano-Sahelian architecture that continues to amaze visitors today. The Niger River would play a central role in the histories of Mali and Songhai, the great empires that succeeded Ghana. These empires built their capitals along the river, controlled its trade routes, and drew sustenance from its waters. Understanding the Niger is essential to understanding these empires. But the Niger was not the only geographical feature shaping West African history. The trade routes that crossed the Sahara, the gold fields of the south, the ecological zones that determined what could be grown, where all these factors combined to create the conditions in which great kingdoms could arise. As we prepare to enter the story of Mali, the greatest of the medieval West African empires, keep the Niger River in your mind. Picture its waters flowing through the savannah, carrying boats laden with goods, passing cities where scholars debated and merchants bargained. This river was the spine of West African civilization, and its story is inseparable from the stories of the kingdoms along its banks. Let your breathing continue to slow, dear listener. Let the gentle sound of water carry you deeper into relaxation as we move from geography to history, from rivers to empires, from the natural world to the human achievements built upon it. In the early 13th century, as Ghana faded from power, a new force was emerging in West Africa. From the highlands of the Upper Niger, among a people called the Mandinka, arose a kingdom that would surpass Ghana in every measure, in territory, in wealth, in fame, in legacy. This kingdom was Mali, and its story begins with a hero whose tale has been told for 8 centuries. The story of Sundiata Keita, the founder of Mali, has been preserved by griots, the professional storytellers, historians, and musicians of West Africa, who have passed their knowledge from generation to generation through oral tradition. These griots do not merely recite facts, they perform epics, bringing the past to life through song and narrative. The Epic of Sundiata is one of the great literary works of African tradition. Like the Iliad or the Mahabharata, it combines historical memory with legendary embellishment, creating a story that is both history and mythology, both fact and inspiration. According to the griots, Sundiata was the son of a king of a small Mandinka state. But his early life showed no promise of future greatness. Born with a disability that prevented him from walking, the young Sundiata was scorned by many at his father's court. His mother, Sogalan, was herself a figure of mystery, said to be descended from the buffalo totem and possessing spiritual powers. When Sundiata's father died, political intrigue drove the young prince and his mother into exile. They wandered for years, guests at various courts, always in danger from the enemies who had seized power in their homeland. Meanwhile, their homeland had fallen under the domination of a tyrant named Sumanguru, the ruler of the Saso people. Sumanguru was a fearsome figure in the griots, telling a sorcerer king who possessed supernatural powers and who used them to oppress the Mandinka people. His rule was harsh, his demands heavy, his cruelty legendary. The Mandinka suffered under Sumanguru's rule, and they remembered the exiled prince. Messengers were sent to find Sundiata and to ask him to return and liberate his people. By this time, Sundiata had overcome his childhood disability in some versions of the story through magical means, in others through sheer determination. He had become a skilled warrior and leader, and when the call came from his homeland, he answered. Sundiata gathered an army from the various peoples who had sheltered him in exile. He formed alliances with other rulers who chafed under Sumanguru's domination, and he marched toward the decisive confrontation that would determine the fate of West Africa. The Battle of Karina, fought around 1235, was the turning point. Sundiata's forces faced Sumanguru's army in a clash that the griots describe in terms of cosmic significance, a battle between good and evil, between liberation and tyranny, between the future and the past. According to tradition, Sundiata possessed knowledge of Sumanguru's magical weaknesses, knowledge obtained through the help of allies, and his own mystical powers. In the battle, Sundiata's army prevailed. Sumanguru was defeated, killed, or perhaps fled into the wilderness where he was transformed into stone, depending on which version of the tale one hears. With Sumanguru gone, the Saso Confederation collapsed. Sundiata became the ruler, not just of his father's small kingdom, but of a growing empire. The Mandinka people, liberated from oppression, formed the core of a new political entity that would grow to become the largest empire West Africa had ever seen. The historical details behind this legendary account are difficult to confirm with certainty. We know from external sources that a Mandinka leader did establish a powerful state in the early 13th century, that this state grew rapidly, and that it would become the Mali Empire of later fame. The story of Sundiata, whatever its legendary embellishments, preserves the memory of this transformation. What we can say with more confidence is that Sundiata established institutions and practices that would guide Mali for generations. He created a constitution, known as the Kurukan Fauga, that established the basic principles of governance. He organized the various clans and peoples of his realm into a political system that balanced central authority with local autonomy. He laid the foundations upon which his successors would build. The Kurukan Fauga is remarkable as one of the oldest constitutions in the world. Preserved through oral tradition, it established principles of social organization, inheritance, and justice that governed Mali for centuries. It recognized the rights of different social groups, established rules for the treatment of slaves, and outlined the responsibilities of rulers toward their subjects. Some scholars have seen in the Kurukan Fauga evidence of democratic or proto-democratic principles in medieval African governance. Whether or not this interpretation is fully justified, the document certainly shows that Mali was no primitive despotism, but a sophisticated state with defined rules and recognized rights. Sundiata died around 1255, but his dynasty would rule Mali for another 3 centuries. The empire he founded would expand to cover a vast territory, from the Atlantic coast to the borders of what is now Nigeria, from the Sahara Desert to the tropical forests. At its height, Mali would be among the largest empires in the world, comparable in size to contemporary powers in Europe or Asia. The kings who followed Sundiata, known as Mansas, built upon his achievements. They consolidated control over the gold-producing regions that had been Ghana's source of wealth. They extended Mali's influence over the trading cities of the Niger Bend. They established diplomatic relations with distant powers, sending and receiving ambassadors from North Africa, Egypt, and beyond. But among all the Mansas of Mali, one stands out above all others, a ruler whose fame would spread across the known world, whose wealth would become legendary, whose single journey would reshape the economy of an entire region. His name was Mansa Musa, and his story is one of the most remarkable in all of history. Let us rest here for a moment, dear listener, in the early glory of Mali, before we follow Mansa Musa on his legendary pilgrimage to Mecca. Let the soft sounds of the evening carry you deeper into relaxation, deeper into the embrace of sleep, as the story of Africa's golden age continues to unfold. In the year 1312, by the calendar used in Europe, a new Mansa came to power in Mali. His name was Musa, and he would become the most famous ruler in African history. Mansa Musa came to the throne through a combination of circumstance and capability. His predecessor, Mansa Abu Bakr II, had become obsessed with the question of what lay across the Atlantic Ocean. According to the account Musa himself would later give, Abu Bakr had sent an expedition of 200 ships across the Atlantic, only one of which returned. Undeterred, Abu Bakr had then outfitted a fleet of 2,000 ships and set sail himself, leaving Musa as regent. Abu Bakr never returned. Whether this story is literally true, or whether it represents a legend developed to legitimize Musa's rule, we cannot know for certain. What we do know is that by the time Musa became Mansa, Mali was already immensely wealthy and powerful. Under his rule, it would reach its absolute peak. Mansa Musa was a devout Muslim, and like all Muslims who have the means, he was obligated to make the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, at least once in his lifetime. In 1324, Musa set out to fulfill this religious duty. The pilgrimage to Mecca was not unusual in itself. Wealthy Muslims from across the Islamic world made the journey regularly. But no one had ever made the Hajj quite like Mansa Musa. According to the accounts that have survived, Musa's caravan included 60,000 people. There were 12,000 servants or slaves, each carrying 4 pounds of gold. There were 80 camels, each carrying 300 pounds of gold dust. The total weight of gold being transported was measured in tons. The procession stretched across the landscape, a river of wealth and humanity flowing from the heart of Africa toward the holy cities of Arabia. Ahead of the Mansa rode 500 servants, each carrying a staff of gold. The Mansa himself traveled in splendor, surrounded by his court, his guards, his scholars, his musicians. The journey took months. The caravan traveled northeast across the Sahara, a route that had been traveled by traders for centuries but never by a party of this magnificence. They reached Egypt, the ancient land of the Nile, which was then ruled by the Mamluk Sultanate. The arrival of Mansa Musa in Cairo created a sensation. The ruler of a distant kingdom, fabulously wealthy, religiously devout, accompanied by an army of servants and a fortune in gold, it was a spectacle that the people of Cairo had never witnessed and would never forget. Musa and his entourage remained in Cairo for several months. During this time, the Mansa demonstrated his wealth through extraordinary generosity. He gave gold to the poor, to officials, to merchants. He purchased goods at prices far above their normal value. He tipped servants with amounts that represented small fortunes. The result, ironically, was economic chaos. Musa's gifts flooded the Cairo market with gold, causing the metal to lose value. Inflation surged. Prices for goods and services rose sharply. The economy of Egypt, one of the wealthiest regions of the Islamic world, was disrupted by the sheer volume of African gold that Musa had released into circulation. According to some accounts, the effects of Musa's visit on Cairo's economy lasted for more than a decade. The value of gold remained depressed for years. This single visit, by a single ruler, had enough economic impact to be recorded by historians writing decades later. Musa eventually continued his journey to Mecca, where he performed the rituals of the Hajj alongside Muslims from across the world. He then returned to Mali, though the return journey was not without difficulties. Having spent so lavishly on the outward trip, Musa had to borrow money to fund his return, reportedly at high interest rates. But the pilgrimage had achieved something beyond religious fulfillment. Mansa Musa had announced Mali to the world. Before his Hajj, Mali was known to some scholars and traders in the Islamic world, but it was hardly a household name. After the Hajj, Mali was famous. Maps made in Europe began to depict Mansa Musa, usually shown seated on a throne, holding a golden orb, the very image of wealth and majesty. The Catalan Atlas, created around 1375 for the King of France, includes a striking image of Mansa Musa. He sits enthroned, crowned, holding a gold nugget and a golden scepter. The accompanying text describes him as the richest and most noble king in all the land. Modern attempts to calculate Mansa Musa's wealth in contemporary terms have arrived at staggering figures. Some historians have described him as the richest person in history, wealthier than any ancient emperor, any medieval monarch, any modern billionaire. Such comparisons are necessarily imprecise. The economies of different eras are not directly comparable, but they capture something important about how Musa's wealth impressed his contemporaries. And it was not merely personal wealth. Mansa Musa was wealthy because Mali was wealthy, because the gold of West Africa flowed through his kingdom, because the trade routes of the Sahara brought the goods of distant lands to his markets. His wealth was systemic, built into the structure of his empire. Musa used his wealth not merely for display, but for construction and patronage. On his return from Mecca, he brought with him scholars and architects from the Arab world. The most famous of these was a Spanish architect named Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, who would transform the architecture of Mali. Al-Sahili is credited with introducing new architectural techniques to West Africa, including the use of burnt brick and the distinctive style of building that would characterize cities like Timbuktu. The Great Mosque of Djenné, though rebuilt many times since, follows principles that al-Sahili is said to have established. The mosques of Timbuktu, likewise, bear his influence. Under Musa's patronage, Timbuktu began its transformation from a trading post into a center of Islamic learning. The famous Sankore Mosque, which would eventually house a university renowned throughout the Islamic world, was built or expanded during Musa's reign. Scholars were invited to the city, libraries were established, and Timbuktu began to develop its reputation as a city of books and learning. Gao, which Musa had conquered and incorporated into his empire, also received his attention. The city had been an important trading center. Under Mali's rule, it became even more prosperous. Musa is said to have built a royal palace in Gao, from which the eastern portions of his empire could be administered. The infrastructure of empire also required attention. Roads had to be maintained, trading posts established, officials appointed to collect taxes and administer justice. Musa's Mali was not merely a collection of territories but a functioning state, with mechanisms for governance that allowed central control over a vast territory. The army remained essential. Mali's power rested ultimately on its ability to project military force, to punish rebels, and to deter rivals. Musa maintained a large army, reportedly numbering 100,000 soldiers, including both cavalry and infantry. This force was sufficient to defend the empire's borders and to maintain internal order. Mansa Musa died around 1337, after a reign of approximately 25 years. He left behind an empire that was, by most measures, at its peak of power and prosperity. Mali controlled the gold and salt trades, the cities of the Niger Bend, and vast territories stretching from the Atlantic to the edge of the desert. But empires, like individuals, do not live forever. After Musa's death, Mali would face challenges that would gradually weaken its succession disputes, rebellions, the rise of new powers on its borders. The empire would survive for another 2 centuries, but it would never again reach the heights achieved under Mansa Musa. Yet the fame of Mansa Musa lived on, carried by the stories of merchants and scholars, preserved in maps and chronicles, passed down through generations of griots who sang of the golden age of Mali. He became a symbol of African achievement, proof that the continent had produced rulers to match any in the world. And the gold that made Musa rich continued to flow from West Africa for centuries, fueling trade and enriching merchants from Cairo to Venice to London. The gold of Mali helped to finance the commercial revolution that transformed Europe, contributed to the wealth that would later fund voyages of exploration, and connected Africa to economic networks spanning the globe. Rest now, dear listener, in the golden afternoon of Mali's glory. Let the image of Mansa Musa seated in splendor, surrounded by wealth, revered by his people, and marveled at by the world, carry you toward the peace of sleep. The story continues, but there is no hurry. The past will wait for you, as it has waited for centuries, as it will wait forever. In the imagination of Europeans, no African city has held more mystery than Timbuktu. For centuries, the very name was synonymous with the edge of the known world, with remoteness and inaccessibility, with legends of fabulous wealth. But Timbuktu was not merely a legend. It was a real city, a center of trade and learning, a place where merchants and scholars gathered from across the known world. Its story deserves to be told in full. The origins of Timbuktu are humble. The city began as a seasonal camp, a place where Tuareg nomads would leave their belongings while they traveled during the summer months. The location near the northernmost point of the Niger River's Great Bend made it a natural meeting point between the desert and the savanna, between the nomadic peoples of the Sahara and the settled peoples of the river valley. Gradually, the seasonal camp became a permanent settlement. Traders recognized the value of a location where goods from the north could meet goods from the south. By the 12th century, Timbuktu had become a significant trading post, attracting merchants from across West Africa and beyond. When Mali conquered the region in the early 14th century, Timbuktu entered a new phase of growth. Mansa Musa's patronage brought scholars and architects to the city. The construction of mosques and the establishment of libraries transformed Timbuktu from a mere trading post into a center of Islamic learning. The Sankore Mosque, built in the 15th century, became the nucleus of what historians sometimes call the University of Sankore. This was not a university in the modern sense. There were no degrees, no formal curriculum, no central administration. Instead, individual scholars gathered students around them, teaching subjects ranging from Islamic theology to grammar to mathematics. But despite its informal organization, Sankore achieved a level of scholarship that impressed visitors from across the Islamic world. By some accounts, the university had 25,000 students at its peak, a figure that, even if exaggerated, suggests an enormous concentration of learned people in a single city. The scholars of Timbuktu produced original works of theology, law, grammar, and history. They copied texts from across the Islamic world, building libraries that contained thousands of manuscripts. They corresponded with scholars in Cairo, Morocco, and other centers of Islamic learning, participating in intellectual debates that spanned continents. The manuscripts of Timbuktu are among the great treasures of African heritage. For centuries, they were preserved by private families, passed down from generation to generation, protected from fire, flood, and conquest. Modern efforts to catalog and preserve these manuscripts have revealed an astonishing wealth of knowledge, tens of thousands of documents covering every aspect of Islamic scholarship and much else besides. These manuscripts refute any notion that sub-Saharan Africa was isolated from the intellectual currents of the wider world. Scholars in Timbuktu read and commented on the same texts that were studied in Baghdad and Cairo. They engaged with the same philosophical and theological questions. They were full participants in the intellectual life of medieval Islam. But Timbuktu was more than a center of learning. It was also one of the great trading cities of the medieval world. The goods that passed through its markets came from every direction: gold and slaves from the south, salt and cloth from the north, copper from the desert mines, books and paper from Morocco and Egypt. The merchants of Timbuktu included people of many different backgrounds. There were Mandinka traders from the Mali heartland, Tuareg nomads from the desert, Arabs and Berbers from North Africa, and others drawn by the profits of trans-Saharan trade. This diverse population gave the city a cosmopolitan character unusual for a place so remote from the major population centers of the medieval world. The economy of Timbuktu was closely linked to the gold trade. Although the city was not near the goldfields itself, it served as a crucial way station in the movement of gold from the mines to the markets. Merchants in Timbuktu organized caravans, arranged credit, and facilitated the exchange of goods that made the gold trade possible. Salt was equally important. The salt mines of Tagaiza, in the heart of the Sahara, produced blocks of salt that were worth nearly as much as gold in the salt-scarce lands to the south. These salt blocks were traded through Timbuktu, moving southward to markets where they would be exchanged for gold, slaves, and other goods. The slave trade, we must acknowledge, was an integral part of Timbuktu's economy. Slaves captured in wars or raids to the south were brought to Timbuktu, where they were sold to merchants who would transport them across the Sahara to North African markets. This trans-Saharan slave trade predated the Atlantic slave trade by many centuries and continued alongside it. The slaves who passed through Timbuktu faced brutal conditions. Many died on the journey across the desert, victims of heat, thirst, and exhaustion. Those who survived faced lives of servitude in distant lands. This traffic in human beings was woven into the very fabric of Timbuktu's prosperity. Life in Timbuktu followed rhythms shaped by climate and commerce. The hot season, from March to June, was a time of reduced activity when the heat made work difficult and the desert routes became even more dangerous. The cooler months saw the arrival of caravans from the north, bringing goods and travelers from across the Sahara. The city was built of mud brick, a material well suited to the hot, dry climate. The distinctive architectural style of Timbuktu, with its mosques and houses featuring protruding wooden beams, remains visible today in the buildings that have survived the centuries. This style, developed in the Sahel, represents a creative adaptation to local conditions, buildings that stay cool in the heat, that can be easily repaired after the rare but devastating rains. The people of Timbuktu lived in neighborhoods organized partly by occupation and partly by ethnic background. The scholars clustered near the mosques and libraries. The merchants had their quarters near the markets. Different ethnic groups, Tuareg, Songhay, Mandinka, Arab, maintained their distinct identities while participating in the shared life of the city. Religion was central to Timbuktu's identity. The city was thoroughly Islamic, its rhythms marked by the 5 daily prayers, its social life governed by Islamic law, its intellectuals engaged primarily with Islamic scholarship. The mosques were not merely places of worship, but centers of community life, where news was shared, disputes settled, and social bonds maintained. Women in Timbuktu occupied a complex position. Islamic law governed matters of marriage, inheritance, and family life, placing significant restrictions on women's public roles. Yet women were not entirely invisible. Some women were educated, some owned property, some played important roles in family and community affairs. The reality was more nuanced than simple stereotypes of either freedom or oppression might suggest. The famous traveler Leo Africanus, who visited Timbuktu in the early 16th century, left a vivid description of the city at its height. He described a wealthy city, with a king who maintained a magnificent court. He noted the abundance of gold and the high prices commanded by imported goods. He described the scholars and the libraries, the mosques and the schools. Leo Africanus also noted something striking: the king of Timbuktu possessed great wealth in gold, yet the people of the city used cowrie shells as everyday currency. These small shells, imported from the Indian Ocean, served as small change in markets across West Africa, a reminder that even the richest kingdoms needed currencies of different denominations for daily transactions. As the centuries passed, Timbuktu's fortunes rose and fell with the empires that controlled it. Under Mali, it flourished. Under Songhai, which conquered the city in the late 15th century, it flourished still more. But when Moroccan forces invaded in 1591, the city entered a long decline from which it never fully recovered. Yet Timbuktu never entirely lost its scholarly traditions. Even as political power shifted and economic importance declined, families continued to preserve their manuscripts, scholars continued to teach, and the city maintained something of its intellectual character. The manuscripts that survive today are testimony to this persistence, this determination to preserve knowledge against the ravages of time. Modern Timbuktu is a poor city in one of the world's poorest countries. The magnificent monuments of the past have crumbled or been rebuilt with varying degrees of authenticity. The trans-Saharan trade that once made the city wealthy has long since declined. Political instability has threatened the survival of the irreplaceable manuscripts. Yet the name Timbuktu still carries magic. It still represents the far edge of the known world, the place where civilization meets wilderness, where scholarship and trade once flourished against all odds. The city that gave the world so much knowledge deserves to be remembered, not as a myth or a legend, but as what it truly was, one of the great centers of human learning and commerce. Rest now, dear listener, in the quiet streets of ancient Timbuktu. Imagine the soft rustle of manuscript pages, the murmur of scholars debating points of law or grammar, the distant calls of merchants in the market. Let these sounds fade into the silence of approaching sleep, as we prepare to journey onward to new kingdoms and new wonders. As the power of Mali gradually waned in the 15th century, a new force was rising along the Niger River. The Songhai people, who had long lived in the region around Gao, were building an empire that would eventually surpass Mali in territory and perhaps in power. The story of Songhai's rise is a story of patient accumulation, of opportunities seized, of leaders with vision and ruthlessness in equal measure. The Songhai had ancient roots in the Middle Niger region. Their ancestors had lived along the river for centuries, fishing its waters, farming its banks, trading with their neighbors. Gao, their principal city, had been a significant trading center long before it became an imperial capital. For much of their early history, the Songhai had been subjects of larger powers, first of Ghana, then of Mali. But even under foreign domination, they maintained their identity and their institutions. Their rulers, bearing the title Za or Zawa, governed their own people even while paying tribute to distant emperors. The opportunity for independence came as Mali weakened. Beginning in the late 14th century, Mali faced a series of challenges: succession disputes, rebellions, attacks from neighbors that gradually eroded its power. The Songhai rulers, watching from Gao, bided their time. In 1464, a new ruler came to power among the Songhai. His name was Sani Ali, and he would transform his people from subjects to masters. Sani Ali was a warrior first and foremost. Over a reign of 28 years, he fought almost constantly, expanding Songhai territory in every direction. He conquered Timbuktu, the great trading and scholarly center. He conquered Janneh, the ancient city on the Niger's inland delta. He pushed the boundaries of Songhai power far beyond anything his predecessors had achieved. His military success rested on innovative tactics and ruthless determination. He built a powerful river-navy fleets of war canoes that allowed rapid movement along the Niger and its tributaries. He developed a cavalry force capable of striking quickly across the savannah. He was willing to spend years on a single campaign, besieging Janneh for 7 years before the city finally fell. Sani Ali's relationship with Islam was complex and controversial. Although nominally Muslim, he was accused by his critics of maintaining traditional religious practices, of persecuting Muslim scholars, of being insufficiently devout. The scholars of Timbuktu, in particular, had reason to resent him when he conquered the city. Many fled or were killed, and the scholarly community was disrupted. Whether these accusations were justified or represented the views of a hostile elite is difficult to judge across the centuries. What is clear is that Sani Ali was primarily a military ruler, concerned more with conquest than with scholarship or religious devotion. His empire was built on the sword. When Sani Ali died in 1492, the same year Columbus reached the Americas, his son briefly succeeded him. But within months, the son was overthrown by one of Sani Ali's generals, a man named Muhammad Tur. Muhammad Tur would rule Songhai for 35 years under the title Askia Muhammad, where Sani Ali had been a conqueror. Askia Muhammad was a consolidator and reformer. He took the empire that Sani Ali had built and transformed it into something more organized, more Islamic, more connected to the wider world. One of Askia Muhammad's first acts was to make the pilgrimage to Mecca, consciously echoing the famous Hajj of Mansa Musa nearly 2 centuries earlier. Like Musa, Askia Muhammad traveled with great wealth and a large entourage. Like Musa, he used the pilgrimage to establish diplomatic relations with other Muslim powers and to recruit scholars and administrators to serve in his realm. The pilgrimage served multiple purposes. It legitimized Askia Muhammad's rule in the eyes of his Muslim subjects, demonstrating his devotion to Islam. It connected Songhai to the broader Islamic world, facilitating trade and cultural exchange. And it allowed Askia Muhammad to position himself as a proper Muslim ruler, in contrast to his predecessor's ambiguous religious stance. Upon returning from Mecca, Askia Muhammad set about reforming his empire. He reorganized the administration, creating a more centralized and professional bureaucracy. He standardized weights and measures, facilitating trade across his vast realm. He established banking systems and inspection mechanisms to reduce fraud in commerce. The military, too, was reorganized. Askia Muhammad created a standing army, professional soldiers who served the state rather than individual lords. He developed a system of military ranks and commands that allowed coordinated action across his extensive territories. This professional army was more reliable and more effective than the levies and retinues of earlier eras. The legal system received particular attention. Askia Muhammad appointed judges and established courts throughout his realm. Islamic law was more systematically applied, creating a degree of legal uniformity across territories that had previously had diverse local customs. This legal standardization facilitated commerce and strengthened central authority. Under Askia Muhammad, Songhai reached its greatest territorial extent. The empire stretched from the Atlantic coast to the borders of Hazaland, from the salt mines of the Sahara to the forests of the south. It encompassed diverse peoples Songhai, Mandinka, Fulani, Tuareg, and many others united under a single administration. The economy flourished. The trans-Saharan trade, which had made Ghana and Mali wealthy, continued to flow through Songhai territory. Gold from the south, salt from the north, and 1,000 other commodities moved along routes that Songhai controlled. The cities of the empire Timbuktu, Gao, Jenne prospered as centers of commerce. Timbuktu, in particular, experienced a golden age under Songhai rule. The scholarly community that Sani Ali had disrupted was restored and expanded. New mosques and schools were built. The University of Sankore attracted students from across the Islamic world. Manuscripts were copied, libraries expanded, knowledge accumulated. The scholars of Timbuktu under Songhai rule produced some of their most important works. Ahmad Baba, the greatest of Timbuktu's scholars, lived in the late 16th century, producing dozens of works on Islamic law, theology, and other subjects. His reputation extended throughout the Islamic world, and his legacy continues to influence scholarship today. But even at its height, Songhai faced challenges. The empire's vast size made it difficult to govern. Regional governors, commanding their own armies, sometimes acted with considerable autonomy. Succession disputes periodically disrupted the central government. And on the borders, neighboring peoples remained ready to exploit any weakness. Askia Muhammad himself was eventually deposed by his own son in 1528, as age and blindness made him unable to govern effectively. The succeeding decades saw a series of rulers, some capable and some less so, struggling to maintain the empire that Sani Ali and Askia Muhammad had built. The final blow came not from internal weakness but from external invasion. In 1591, a Moroccan army crossed the Sahara, armed with firearms that Songhai forces lacked. At the Battle of Tondabai, this relatively small but technologically superior force defeated the Songhai army, capturing Gao and Timbuktu. The Moroccan invasion did not immediately destroy Songhai. Resistance continued for years, and Moroccan control over the conquered territories was always incomplete. But the empire as a coherent political entity was finished. West Africa entered a new era, one characterized by smaller states, continuing trade, but no single dominant power. The fall of Songhai marked the end of the great medieval empires of West Africa. Never again would a single power control the vast territories that Ghana, Mali, and Songhai had ruled. The region would remain economically and culturally vital, but political fragmentation would be the norm until the European colonial powers imposed new, externally defined boundaries. Yet the legacy of these empires endured. The trade routes continued to function, even as political control changed hands. The scholarly traditions of Timbuktu survived, diminished but not destroyed. The memories of past greatness, preserved by griots and scholars, inspired later generations to dream of restoration and renewal. Let us pause here, dear listener, in the twilight of Songhai's glory. The empires of the Western Sudan have passed before us: Ghana, Mali, Songhai, each building on what came before, each leaving a legacy for what came after. These were civilizations to match any the world has known, and their stories deserve to be remembered. As we travel eastward from the territories of the great Niger empires, we encounter a different pattern of political organization. In the region that is now northern Nigeria and southern Niger, the Hausa people developed not a single empire, but a collection of independent city-states, each with its own character, each competing and cooperating with its neighbors. The Hausa city-states Kano, Katsina, Zaria, Gabir, and others represent an alternative model of African political organization. Rather than centralizing power in a single capital, the Hausa world was polycentric, with multiple centers of power engaged in complex relationships of rivalry and alliance. Each city-state was a substantial entity in its own right. Kano, the largest, may have had a population of 30,000 or more at its peak. These were true cities, with specialized crafts, complex administrations, and connections to trade networks spanning continents. The origins of the Hausa city-states are preserved in legend. According to tradition, a hero named Bayajeda came from the east, slew a sacred snake that had been terrorizing the land, and married the Queen of Dora. Their descendants founded the original 7 Hausa states, the Hausa Bakwai, which formed the core of Hausa civilization. Like many origin legends, this story probably contains elements of historical truth mixed with mythological elaboration. What is clear is that by the 2nd millennium CE, the Hausa city-states had emerged as significant political and economic entities, each developing its own specialty and character. Kano was renowned for its textile industry. Kano cloth, dyed with local indigo, was exported across the Sahara and throughout West Africa. The city's craftsmen developed distinctive techniques, and Kano cloth became a recognized brand, a mark of quality that commanded premium prices in distant markets. Katsina was a center of learning, rivaling Timbuktu as a destination for scholars seeking education in Islamic sciences. Its schools attracted students from across the Hausa world and beyond, creating networks of scholars that connected Hausaland to the broader Islamic intellectual community. Zaria, also known as Zazau, was famous for its military prowess and slave raiding. Its armies ventured into the regions to the south, capturing people who would be sold into the trans-Saharan slave trade. This specialization in military affairs made Zaria both feared and powerful. Gobir, in the north, guarded the desert frontier, managing relations with the Tuareg nomads who controlled the approaches to the Sahara. Its strategic position gave it importance despite its relatively small size. The economy of the Hausa states was diverse and sophisticated. Agriculture provided the foundation. Millet, sorghum, and other crops fed the urban populations. Cattle raised by Fulani pastoralists who lived among the Hausa provided meat, milk, and hides. The combination of settled agriculture and mobile pastoralism created a complementary system capable of supporting substantial populations. Beyond agriculture, the Hausa states were centers of craft production and trade. Leather goods, textiles, metalwork, and other products were manufactured in the cities and exported widely. Hausa merchants developed trading networks that stretched across West Africa, reaching the forest zones to the south and the Saharan routes to the north. The trading diaspora of Hausa merchants was one of the most extensive in West Africa. Hausa traders could be found in cities across the region, often living in distinct quarters where they maintained their language, customs, and commercial connections. These diaspora communities facilitated long-distance trade, providing networks of trust and credit that reduced the risks of commerce across vast distances. Islam came to Hausaland gradually, spreading along the trade routes that connected the region to North Africa. By the 15th century, Islam was well established in the cities, though the countryside often retained traditional religious practices. This urban-rural religious divide would have significant consequences in later centuries. The rulers of the Hausa states navigated a complex religious landscape. They were expected to be Muslims, to maintain mosques and support scholars. Yet they also had traditional responsibilities, ritual functions connected to pre-Islamic beliefs that their subjects expected them to fulfill. Many rulers maintained both identities, practicing Islam, while also participating in traditional ceremonies. This religious syncretism troubled reformist Muslims, who saw it as corruption of the faith. tensions between Islamic reformers and syncretic rulers would eventually explode in the jihad movements of the 18th and 19th centuries, transforming the political landscape of the region. The architecture of the Hassa city-states was distinctive and impressive. The cities were surrounded by massive walls, some stretching for miles, built of mud brick and maintained over generations. Within the walls, compounds housed extended families, with rooms arranged around central courtyards. Mosques, palaces, and markets formed the centers of urban life. The Great Mosque of Kano, originally built in the 15th century, exemplifies Hassa architectural achievement. Its massive minaret, visible from across the city, proclaimed the Islamic identity of the community. The mosque served as a center of worship, education, and community gathering, playing the same role in Hassa society that cathedrals played in medieval Europe. Political organization in the Hassa states combined elements of hereditary rule with bureaucratic administration. The Sarki, or king, was drawn from the royal family, though succession was not strictly hereditary. Councils of powerful officials had significant influence over who became king. Once in power, the Sarki governed through a hierarchy of officials, each with defined responsibilities. The political system included checks on royal power. The officials who administered the kingdom were not merely servants of the king, but had their own bases of power. The need to maintain the support of these officials constrained royal action. Moreover, the example of neighboring states provided alternative models. A king who governed badly might see his subjects defect to a rival city. Women played important roles in Hassa society, though their public participation varied over time and place. The legend of Queen Amamina of Zaria, who supposedly ruled in the 16th century and led her armies to conquest, suggests that female leadership was not impossible. Women controlled certain trades, participated in commerce, and exercised influence within their households. The multiple state system of Hossaland had both advantages and disadvantages. Competition between states drove innovation and economic development, as each city sought advantages over its rivals. But it also meant that the Hassa were never able to present a united front against external threats. When powerful enemies arose, individual city-states had to face them largely alone. The Hassa city-states would eventually be transformed by the Fulani Jihad of the early 19th century, which overthrew the traditional rulers and established the Sokoto Caliphate. But even after this transformation, the cities continued, their commercial traditions and cultural practices persisting under new political arrangements. Today, Hossaland remains one of the most densely populated and economically dynamic regions of West Africa. The cities that the Hassa built centuries ago continue to thrive. The language they spoke has become one of Africa's most widely used languages. The commercial traditions they developed continue to shape business practices across the region. Let us carry with us the image of these cities, Kano, Katsina, Zaria, as centers of craft, commerce, and learning. They represent a form of African achievement different from the great empires, but no less impressive in its own way. East of Hossaland, centered on the Great Lake Chad Basin, another power arose that would endure for over a millennium. The Empire of Kanem, and its successor state Bornu, represents one of the longest-lasting political entities in African history. Lake Chad, around which this civilization developed, is a remarkable body of water. Located at the meeting point of several ecological zones, it provides water and sustenance in a region where both are precious. The lake has fluctuated dramatically in size over the centuries, expanding during wet periods and shrinking during droughts. But it has always been a focal point for human settlement. The peoples who lived around Lake Chad developed sophisticated adaptations to their environment. They farmed the lake's margins when waters receded, fished its waters year-round, and raised cattle on the surrounding grasslands. This ecological diversity supported larger populations than might have been possible in less favored regions. The Kanem state emerged sometime around the 9th century CE, formed by the Kanembu people under a ruling dynasty known as the Safawa. This dynasty would prove extraordinarily durable, ruling for over 8 centuries, a longevity matched by few ruling families anywhere in the world. Early Kanem was organized around the institution of divine kingship. The Mai, or king, was believed to possess spiritual powers essential to the well-being of the kingdom. He lived in seclusion, rarely appearing in public, communicating with his subjects through intermediaries. This sacralization of royal power helped to maintain the dynasty's legitimacy across the centuries. Islam reached Canaan in the late 11th century, brought by traders and scholars along the trans-Saharan routes. The conversion of the Mai to Islam marked a turning point in the kingdom's history. Canaan became one of the earliest and most devoutly Islamic states in sub-Saharan Africa, sending students to study in Egypt and maintaining close ties with the Islamic world. The adoption of Islam did not eliminate traditional beliefs entirely. Many practices associated with divine kingship continued, adapted to Islamic frameworks. The Mai remained a sacred figure, his palace a place of mystery and power. This fusion of Islamic and traditional elements characterized Canaan-Bornu throughout its history. At its height, Canaan controlled territory stretching from the Fezzan in the north to deep into the savanna lands in the south. Its armies raided widely, capturing slaves who were traded northward across the Sahara. Its merchants participated in the trans-Saharan trade, exchanging slaves, ivory, and other goods for horses, cloth, and manufactured goods from the north. Horses were particularly important to Canaan's military power. The acquisition and breeding of horses, imported from North Africa and bred locally, gave Canaan cavalries that dominated the regional battlefields. A mounted warrior, armored and armed with sword and lance, was a fearsome opponent against enemies who fought on foot. But empires faced challenges, and Canaan was no exception. In the late 14th century, a combination of internal dissension and external attack forced the Safaviwa dynasty to abandon their original homeland. They moved west of Lake Chad, establishing a new capital in the region known as Bornu. This transition from Canaan to Bornu was not an end but a transformation. The dynasty survived. The administrative structures persisted. The cultural and religious traditions continued. What changed was the geographical center of the empire, which now lay to the west of the lake rather than to the east. Under the leadership of a capable Mai named Ali Gaji, who ruled in the late 15th century, Bornu stabilized and began to recover its former power. Ali Gaji built a new capital at Angazargamu, which would serve as the empire's center for over 3 centuries. The greatest of Bornu's rulers was Mai Idris Aloma, who reigned from about 1571 to 1603. Under Idris Aloma, Bornu reached its peak of power and prestige, controlling vast territories and commanding the respect of distant powers. Idris Aloma was a military innovator. He introduced firearms to his army's guns purchased from the Ottoman Turks, who had expanded into North Africa and were now neighbors across the Sahara. These firearms gave Bornu forces a technological advantage over their enemies, much as similar weapons would give Europeans advantages over African powers in later centuries. But Idris Aloma was more than just a warrior. He was also a diplomat, maintaining relations with the Ottoman Empire, Morocco, and other powers. He was a reformer, working to purify Islamic practice in his realm and to strengthen the administration. He was a patron of learning, supporting scholars and encouraging education. The scholars of Bornu produced important works of Islamic learning. Ibn Fertu, a chronicler at Idris Aloma's court, wrote detailed accounts of the Mai's campaigns and achievements that provide invaluable historical information. Other scholars wrote on law, theology, and other subjects, contributing to a scholarly tradition that connected Bornu to the broader Islamic world. The social structure of Bornu was hierarchical and complex. At the top stood the Mai, surrounded by a court of officials, nobles, and advisors. Below the nobility came free commoners, farmers, craftsmen, merchants who formed the bulk of the population. At the bottom were slaves who worked in agriculture, served in households, and filled the ranks of the army. The slave system of Bornu deserves particular attention. Slaves were acquired through war purchase and tribute from vassal states. They filled various roles in the economy and society. Some slaves, particularly military slaves, could achieve positions of considerable power, commanding armies and influencing policy. Others lived and died in obscurity, laboring in fields or households. The trans-Saharan slave trade was central to Bornu's economy. Thousands of enslaved people were exported northward each year, traded for horses, cloth, weapons, and other goods. This trade connected Bornu to Mediterranean markets, making it part of an economic network spanning continents. The women of Bornu's ruling class exercised significant influence, though from behind the scenes. The mother of the Mai, known as the Majira, held an official position of great power. Other royal women controlled their own estates and revenues, maintained their own clients, and influenced political decisions. This female power was not publicly acknowledged but was real nonetheless. Bornu survived the centuries through adaptability and resilience. When challenges arose, whether internal rebellions, external invasions, or environmental changes, the empire found ways to respond. The Sayfawa dynasty maintained its legitimacy, even when its actual power fluctuated. The institutions of government persisted, providing continuity amid change. The empire would eventually decline in the 19th century, weakened by the same jihad movements that transformed Hausaland. The Fulani reformers challenged Bornu's legitimacy, accusing its rulers of impure Islamic practice. New states arose in territories that had been under Bornu's influence. Yet Bornu did not entirely disappear. A remnant state survived, its rulers continuing to claim the title of Mai until the colonial period. Even today, the traditional ruler of Bornu remains an important figure in Nigerian society, his office connecting the present to a past stretching back over 1,000 years. The story of Kanem Bornu reminds us of the durability of African political institutions. A dynasty that ruled for over 8 centuries, an empire that survived catastrophic setbacks, a tradition of government that adapted to changing circumstances. These are achievements that deserve recognition. Our journey now takes us south and west, into the great rainforests and savannas of Central Africa. Here, in regions that European maps long labeled as unknown, sophisticated kingdoms developed their own forms of political organization, artistic expression, and spiritual practice. The Kingdom of Congo, centered in what is now northern Angola and the western parts of the Democratic Republic of Congo, was among the most significant of these Central African states. When Portuguese explorers first arrived at the mouth of the Congo River in 1483, they encountered not a primitive people, but an organized kingdom with a complex administration, a developed economy, and a ruler who considered himself the equal of European monarchs. The origins of Congo are obscure, lost in the mists of unwritten history. Traditions suggest that the kingdom emerged in the 14th century, formed through a combination of conquest and alliance among peoples living south of the Congo River. By the time the Portuguese arrived, Congo had been established for generations. The kingdom was organized around the figure of the Mana-Congo, or king, who ruled from his capital at Mbanza, Congo. The Mana-Congo was chosen from among members of the royal family by a council of electors, a system that balanced hereditary principle with the need for capable leadership. The king was believed to possess spiritual powers, mediating between the living and the dead, ensuring the prosperity of his realm. Below the king, a hierarchy of officials administered the kingdom's provinces. These provincial governors, often members of the royal family or powerful nobles, collected taxes, maintained order, and commanded local military forces. The system allowed the Mana-Congo to extend his authority across a substantial territory while granting considerable autonomy to local leaders. The economy of Congo rested on agriculture and trade. Farmers grew millet, sorghum, and later crops introduced from the Americas such as maize and cassava. Palm trees provided oil, wine, and fiber. Artisans produced iron tools, woven cloths, and pottery. The kingdom's cloth currency, called Nzembu, made from shells collected along the coast, facilitated trade across the region. Trade networks connected Congo to distant regions. Copper from the interior, ivory from elephant hunters, and various other goods moved through the kingdom's markets. When the Portuguese arrived, Congo was already integrated into regional exchange networks. The Europeans simply added new partners and new goods to existing systems. The encounter between Congo and Portugal was initially friendly and seemingly equal. The first Portuguese visitors were treated as guests, brought before the Manicongo, and allowed to observe the kingdom's institutions. The Portuguese were impressed by what they found a great king, as they described him, ruling an orderly and prosperous realm. The Manicongo, who ruled when contact was established, Nzinga Ancuowu, saw opportunities in the Portuguese relationship. Here were strangers with advanced technology, including firearms and ships, who might prove useful allies. The Portuguese offered trade goods, technical knowledge, and connections to a wider world. Most remarkably, the rulers of Congo converted to Christianity, beginning with Nzinga Ancuowu himself in 1491. His son and successor, Nzinga Mbemba, took the Christian name Afonso and became an ardent promoter of the new faith. Churches were built, missionaries welcomed, and a generation of young Congolese were sent to Portugal for education. Afonso I, who ruled from about 1509 to 1542, conducted a remarkable correspondence with the King of Portugal, addressing him as a fellow Christian monarch. These letters, preserved in Portuguese archives, provide extraordinary insight into Afonso's hopes and frustrations. He sought to modernize his kingdom using European knowledge while maintaining its independence. He wanted the benefits of partnership without the costs of subordination. But the relationship with Portugal was not truly equal, and the Portuguese interest in Africa was not primarily about spreading Christianity or sharing knowledge. What the Portuguese wanted, above all, was slaves. The transatlantic slave trade, just beginning during Afonso's reign, would eventually devastate Congo and transform the entire region. The Portuguese demand for enslaved workers to labor on their plantations in Brazil created pressures that Congolese rulers struggled to manage. Afonso himself complained bitterly about the slave trade in his letters to the Portuguese king. He wrote of how the trade was depopulating his kingdom, how Portuguese traders were encouraging his own nobles to engage in slave raiding, how the demand for slaves was corrupting Congolese society. His protests were largely ignored. Despite these pressures, Congo maintained its independence for over 2 centuries after initial contact. The kingdom adopted useful European technologies, and played European powers against each other when possible. But the cumulative effects of the slave trade, combined with internal political divisions, gradually weakened the kingdom. The Battle of Mwila in 1665 marked a turning point. A Congolese army, led by the Manicongo Antonio I, faced a Portuguese force fighting in support of a rival claimant to the throne. The battle was catastrophic for Congo. The king was killed, his head taken as a trophy, and his army destroyed. After Mwila, Congo fragmented into competing factions, each claiming the throne, none able to reunite the kingdom. The once powerful state dissolved into a patchwork of small entities, preyed upon by slave traders and foreign powers. Yet the Congolese people maintained their identity and their Christian faith, transformed by local traditions into a distinctive African Christianity. The memory of the kingdom persisted, a reference point for later generations who sought to understand their past and imagine their future. The story of Congo is tragic in many ways, a prosperous kingdom undermined by forces beyond its control, a people subjected to centuries of exploitation. But it is also a story of resilience, of adaptation, of a civilization that left its mark despite the devastation it suffered. Congo was not alone in Central Africa. Neighboring kingdoms Longo, Ndongo, Matamba, and others developed their own forms of political organization. Some allied with European powers, others resisted. All were eventually drawn into the vortex of the slave trade, their populations depleted, their societies transformed. The Queen Nzinga of Ndongo and Matamba, who ruled in the early 17th century, exemplifies both the possibilities and limitations of African resistance. A skilled diplomat and military leader, she fought against Portuguese expansion for over 3 decades, alternately battling and negotiating with the colonizers. She became a symbol of African resistance, remembered in oral traditions, and celebrated in later generations. But even Nzinga could not turn back the tide. The slave trade continued to grow, eventually reaching a scale almost beyond comprehension. Millions of Africans were torn from their homes, transported across the Atlantic, forced to labor and die in the Americas. This tragedy reshaped African societies, economies, and demographics in ways that are still felt today. Let us remember Congo as it was before this devastation, a prosperous kingdom, a center of art and spirituality, a place where sophisticated political institutions had developed over centuries. Let us remember that Central Africa, like West Africa, produced civilizations worthy of study and respect. In the heart of the African continent, around the Great Lakes that mark the border between East and Central Africa, another cluster of kingdoms emerged. These states, including Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, and others, developed distinctive institutions and cultures that continue to influence the region today. The Great Lakes region is one of Africa's most densely populated areas, favored by fertile volcanic soils, reliable rainfall, and the moderating influence of the lakes themselves. Mountains rise above valleys, creating a landscape of dramatic beauty. This environment supported populations that, by African standards, were remarkably concentrated. The states that developed in this region shared certain common features, though each also had its distinctive characteristics. All were kingdoms ruled by sacred monarchs whose persons were surrounded by elaborate rituals and taboos. All had hierarchical social structures, with distinctions between different groups based on occupation, wealth, or ancestry. The Kingdom of Rwanda, one of the most thoroughly documented of these states, exemplifies the pattern. At its head stood the Mami, or king, believed to be the embodiment of Rwanda itself. The well-being of the kingdom depended on the proper performance of royal rituals, on the maintenance of the proper relationship between the Mwami and the spiritual powers that governed the world. Below the Mwami, Rwandan society was divided into groups whose relationships remain controversial among historians. The Tutsi, traditionally cattle herders, generally held positions of political and economic dominance. The Hutu, traditionally farmers, formed the majority of the population. The Twa, a smaller group, occupied specialized niches in the economy and society. The nature of these divisions has been much debated. Colonial-era observers, influenced by racial theories then prevalent in Europe, described Tutsi and Hutu as distinct races with different origins. More recent scholarship suggests that the categories were more fluid, based more on occupation and status than on fixed ethnic identity. Individuals could move between categories depending on their economic success or political connections. Regardless of their origin, these distinctions became more rigid under colonial rule, when Belgian administrators issued identity cards that fixed every Rwandan's ethnic category. The consequences of this rigidification would prove tragic in the late 20th century. The economy of pre-colonial Rwanda centered on two activities: farming and cattle herding. The fertile volcanic soils supported dense populations of farmers growing bananas, beans, sorghum, and other crops. Cattle, in the hands of the Tutsi elite, represented wealth and status, their milk and meat supplements to the agricultural diet. A complex system of patron-client relationships linked different groups. A wealthy cattle owner might lend cattle to farmers, who would care for the animals and consume their milk in exchange for various obligations. These relationships, known as Ubuhake, created networks of dependency that structured Rwandan society. The Rwandan state developed sophisticated mechanisms for administration and control. The kingdom was divided into provinces, each governed by officials appointed by the Mwami. Military units, organized by hill and region, could be called up for defense or conquest. A system of spies and informants kept the central government aware of developments throughout the realm. The army of Rwanda was renowned for its effectiveness. Disciplined and well-organized, it expanded the kingdom's territory through conquests that continued into the colonial period. Neighboring peoples feared the Rwandan military machine, which could mobilize rapidly and strike with devastating effect. Uganda, the largest of the Great Lakes kingdoms, lay to the north, on the shores of Lake Victoria. Its Kabaka, or king, ruled over a prosperous and densely populated state that impressed the first European visitors with its organization and sophistication. When British explorer John Hanning Speke reached Buganda in 1862, he found not the primitive society he might have expected, but a kingdom with paved roads, a complex bureaucracy, and a kabaka who received him with all the ceremony due to a fellow head of state. Buganda's political system was notably centralized for an African kingdom. The kabaka exercised direct control over his kingdom through appointed chiefs who owed their positions to royal favor, not to hereditary right. This gave the kabaka unusual power to reward loyalty and punish dissent. The society of Buganda was highly stratified, with royalty at the top, chiefs and their families below them, and commoners at the bottom. Slaves, captured in wars or traded from outside, performed much of the labor. Women occupied subordinate positions, though royal women could wield significant influence. Religion in the Great Lakes kingdoms combined belief in a supreme creator god with attention to ancestor spirits and other supernatural beings. The royal courts maintained elaborate religious establishments, with priests performing rituals essential to the kingdom's well-being. The spirits of deceased kings remained active presences, consulted on important matters and propitiated through appropriate offerings. The arrival of Christianity and Islam in the 19th century created religious competition that had profound political consequences. In Buganda, conflicts between Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, and traditionalists led to a series of civil wars that weakened the kingdom and facilitated British colonization. The crafts of the Great Lakes kingdoms achieved high levels of sophistication. Ironworkers produced tools and weapons of quality. Potters created distinctive wares. Weavers produced cloth from bark and other fibers. The royal courts patronized artists and artisans, creating centers of cultural production. Architecture in the region reflected local conditions and materials. Houses were built of wood, reeds, and other plant materials, often with conical thatched roofs. The palaces of the kings were larger and more elaborate versions of common house types, their size and decoration reflecting royal status. The Great Lakes kingdoms maintained complex relationships with each other and with surrounding peoples. Alliances, conflicts, and diplomatic marriages linked the various courts. Trade networks moved goods across the region and connected it to more distant markets on the coast. The arrival of Arab traders from the coast in the early 19th century, followed by European explorers and missionaries, began a transformation that would culminate in colonial rule. The kingdoms would be incorporated into European empires, Germany and Belgium in Rwanda and Burundi, Britain in Buganda. Their institutions adapted to serve colonial purposes. Yet the kingdoms left lasting legacies. In Rwanda and Burundi, the monarchies survived in some form until after independence, and traditional institutions continue to influence political life. In Buganda, the kingdom was abolished and later restored, its kabaka serving as a cultural symbol even without political power. The history of these kingdoms remains a living presence in the region. Let these images of lakeside kingdoms, of sacred kings and complex hierarchies, of fertile lands and sophisticated statecraft, settle into your relaxing mind as we continue our journey across the African continent. Before we can understand the great stone cities of southern Africa, we must first understand the movement of peoples that transformed the region over thousands of years. This migration, known as the Bantu expansion, is one of the most significant demographic events in human history. The term Bantu refers not to a single people, but to a family of languages over 400 related tongues spoken today by more than 300 million people across Central, Eastern, and Southern Africa. These languages share common roots, suggesting that their speakers share common ancestors who spread across the continent over thousands of years. The original homeland of the Bantu languages appears to have been in the region of modern Cameroon and Nigeria, where the greatest diversity of Bantu languages is found today. From this homeland, speakers of early Bantu languages began to move south into the rainforests of Central Africa, east toward the Great Lakes, and eventually south into what is now South Africa. This migration was not a sudden invasion but a gradual process unfolding over 2,000 years or more. Bantu-speaking peoples moved into new areas, sometimes displacing earlier inhabitants, sometimes intermarrying with them, sometimes living alongside them. The result was a gradual transformation of the human geography of sub-Saharan Africa. The Bantu migrants brought with them technologies and practices that gave them advantages over the hunting and gathering peoples they encountered. They practiced agriculture, growing crops like yams, sorghum and millet that could support larger populations. They kept domestic animals, especially goats and later cattle. Most significantly, they worked iron, producing tools and weapons that made farming easier and warfare more effective. Ironworking was central to Bantu success. The ability to produce iron hoes made it possible to clear forest and till soil more efficiently. Iron spearheads and arrowheads made hunting more productive and warfare more deadly. Iron tools could be traded for other goods, creating networks of exchange that linked distant communities. The Bantu expansion reshaped the population of sub-Saharan Africa. Before the migration, the southern portion of the continent was inhabited primarily by Khoisan peoples, hunter-gatherers, speaking click languages quite different from Bantu tongues. The Bantu migrants eventually came to dominate most of the region, though Khoisan populations persisted in areas less suitable for farming. As Bantu-speaking peoples moved into southern Africa, they adapted to new environments. The subtropical and temperate regions of the south were different from the tropical lands where their ancestors had lived. Rainfall patterns differed, the seasons were reversed, and different crops and animals proved successful. The introduction of cattle to southern Africa was particularly significant. Cattle had been domesticated in the Sahara or the Near East and gradually spread southward. For Bantu speakers who acquired them, cattle became more than just a source of food. They became measures of wealth, objects of ritual significance, and markers of social status. Cattle required grazing land, which meant that cattle-keeping peoples tended to settle in savanna regions rather than forests. They also required management protection from predators, movement to fresh pastures, care during droughts. Societies organized around cattle developed particular social structures, with distinctions based on the ownership of herds. The combination of agriculture, cattle keeping, and iron working created conditions for the development of complex societies. Populations grew, settlements expanded, trade networks formed, social hierarchies emerged. By the first millennium CE, the foundations for the great civilizations of southern Africa were being laid. Archaeological sites across southern Africa reveal the gradual development of complexity. Early Iron Age settlements show small farming communities practicing mixed agriculture and keeping small herds. Over time, some settlements grew larger. Evidence of craft specialization and long-distance trade appears. Signs of social stratification become visible. The pattern is clearest on the Zimbabwe Plateau, the highland region between the Limpopo and Zambezi rivers that would become home to Great Zimbabwe and related civilizations. Here, the combination of good agricultural land, grazing areas, and access to gold deposits created conditions particularly favorable for the development of powerful states. Gold was present in the geology of the Zimbabwe Plateau. Alluvial gold could be panned from streams. Deeper deposits could be extracted through mining. This gold, we will see, would become the foundation of Great Zimbabwe's wealth, connecting the interior of southern Africa to trading networks stretching to the Indian Ocean and beyond. But gold alone did not create civilizations. The people of the Zimbabwe Plateau had to develop the social and political institutions capable of organizing labor, managing trade, and mobilizing resources for monumental construction. Understanding how they did so is key to understanding Great Zimbabwe. Let the slow rhythm of migration and development settle into your mind, dear listener. Thousands of years of movement and growth, of adaptation and innovation, created the conditions for what was to come. The story builds gradually, like the walls of stone that we will soon encounter. While the peoples of the African interior developed their own civilizations, the eastern coast of Africa was being transformed by contact with the wider world. The Indian Ocean, far from being a barrier, was a highway connecting Africa to Arabia, Persia, India, and even distant China. The Indian Ocean trading system was ancient, stretching back thousands of years before the period we are discussing. Sailors from various lands had learned to use the monsoon winds that blow from the southwest in summer and the northeast in winter to across vast stretches of ocean with remarkable regularity. These winds made it possible to sail from Arabia or India to the African coast, conduct trade, and return home, all within a single year. The African coast offered valuable goods for this trade. Ivory, from the elephants that roamed the interior, was prized across the medieval world for carving and ornamentation. Gold, from the mines of Zimbabwe and other inland regions, was always in demand. Slaves, captured in raids and wars, were sold to buyers in Arabia, Persia, and India. Various other goods, animal skins, tortoise shells, ambergris, exotic woods added to the commerce. In exchange, African traders received goods from across the Indian Ocean world. Cloth from India, in a variety of colors and patterns, was highly prized. Beads, particularly glass beads in certain colors, were valued for personal adornment and for use as currency. Porcelain from China, an expensive luxury, signified wealth and sophistication. Metal goods, including iron and copper items, supplemented local production. This trade created wealth that concentrated in coastal settlements, some of which grew into substantial cities. Kilwa, on an island off the coast of present-day Tanzania, became one of the wealthiest and most powerful of these coastal cities. At its peak in the 14th and 15th centuries, Kilwa controlled much of the gold trade from Zimbabwe and wielded influence over a string of settlements along the coast. The culture that developed in these coastal cities was a blend of African and external influences. The people were predominantly African, but centuries of contact with Arabia and Persia had brought Islamic religion, Arabic writing, and various cultural practices. The language that developed, Swahili, was fundamentally a Bantu language, but incorporated numerous Arabic loanwords. This coastal culture is often called Swahili civilization, after the language and people who created it. It was distinctively African, rooted in African populations, African agricultural and fishing practices, African social structures, but also cosmopolitan, connected to the wider Indian Ocean world, influenced by Islamic civilization. The cities of the Swahili coast were built of coral stone, quarried from the reefs that lined much of the coastline. The great mosques and houses of the wealthy featured elaborate carved decorations, incorporating geometric patterns and Arabic calligraphy. The streets were narrow and shaded, adapted to the hot coastal climate. Daily life in these cities revolved around trade and Islam. The rhythms of prayer 5 times daily structured the day. The arrival and departure of trading ships structured the year. Merchants gathered to negotiate deals, scholars taught in mosques and schools, craftsmen produced goods for local use and export. Women in Swahili society had defined roles but could achieve significant influence. Some women owned property, engaged in commerce, and wielded power within their households. The practice of secluding elite women, common in some Islamic societies, was less strict on the Swahili coast, where women might be seen in markets and public spaces. The connection between the coast and the interior was crucial. Traders from the coastal cities traveled inland, seeking gold, ivory, and other goods. Porters carried these goods to the coast, where they were sold to ocean-going merchants. This flow of goods created relationships, sometimes peaceful, sometimes violent, between coastal and interior peoples. It was through this Indian Ocean trade network that the gold of Zimbabwe reached the wider world. The mines of the interior produced gold that was brought to trading posts, then carried to the coast, then loaded onto ships bound for India, Arabia, and beyond. Some of this gold eventually reached Europe, feeding the economies of Mediterranean cities. The famous Chinese Admiral Zheng He, who led fleets of enormous ships across the Indian Ocean in the early 15th century, reached the East African coast. Chinese records document contact with Malindi and other African ports. Chinese porcelain found in East African archaeological sites confirms these connections. When the Portuguese rounded the Cape of Good Hope at the end of the 15th century, they did not arrive in an unknown world. They encountered prosperous trading cities, experienced merchants, and established commercial networks. The Portuguese were newcomers to a system that had operated successfully for centuries. The Portuguese sought to dominate this trade by force, attacking coastal cities that resisted their demands for tribute and favorable trading terms. Some cities fell, others submitted. A few managed to maintain independence. The balance of power in the Indian Ocean shifted, but the trading networks survived, adapted, and continued. Understanding the Indian Ocean trade is essential for understanding Great Zimbabwe. The stone city of the interior was not an isolated phenomenon but part of a network stretching across oceans. The gold that built Great Zimbabwe's power flowed to markets in India and China. The beads and cloth found in its ruins came from distant lands. Zimbabwe was connected to a world system, even if that connection was mediated through coastal intermediaries. Let the gentle sound of waves carry you deeper into relaxation as we prepare to encounter the Great Stone City, itself Great Zimbabwe, the heart of southern African civilization, a monument to African achievement that has inspired wonder and controversy for centuries. In the highlands of southeastern Africa, between the Zambezi and Limpopo rivers, there stands a monument that has puzzled, inspired, and controversially debated since Europeans first encountered it. Great Zimbabwe, the great stone houses, rises from the savannah like a vision from another age. The first European to report seeing Great Zimbabwe was the Portuguese trader Antonio Fernandes, who passed through the region around 1511. He described a powerful kingdom with stone-built palaces that controlled much of the gold trade in the region. His reports, like those of later Portuguese visitors, made clear that the builders of these structures were Africans, members of a kingdom called Nenwin Mutapa or Monomatapa by the Portuguese. Yet when later European visitors encountered Great Zimbabwe, many refused to believe that Africans could have built it. Racist assumptions led them to attribute the ruins to Phoenicians, to Arabs, to the Queen of Sheba, to anyone except the black African peoples who lived in the region. This denial of African achievement persisted well into the 20th century. Modern archaeology has definitively established what the Portuguese already knew in the 16th century. Great Zimbabwe was built by Shona-speaking African peoples, ancestors of the people who live in the region today. The construction techniques, the artifacts found within the walls, the gradual development of the site over centuries all point unmistakably to local African builders. The site of Great Zimbabwe is dramatic. It occupies a position between two geographical zones: the lowlands to the south and east, the highlands to the north and west. This transitional position may have given it economic and strategic advantages, controlling routes between different ecological areas. The ruins cover an area of about 1,800 acres, making Great Zimbabwe one of the largest ancient structures in sub-Saharan Africa. Three main components make up the site: the hill complex, built on a granite hill that dominates the landscape, the Great Enclosure, a massive stone structure in the valley below, and the valley ruins, a collection of smaller structures spread across the valley floor. The hill complex appears to have been the earliest focus of settlement. The granite hill provided natural defenses and a commanding view of the surrounding territory. Walls built on top of the natural rock enhanced these defenses and created enclosed spaces for elite residences and religious activities. The construction techniques used at Great Zimbabwe are remarkable for what they do not include. The walls are built entirely without mortar. The stone blocks are carefully shaped and fitted together so precisely that they hold in place by their own weight and arrangement. This dry stone construction requires exceptional skill, as any weakness in the wall's structure would cause it to collapse. The stones themselves come from the surrounding granite outcrops. The local granite has a tendency to exfoliate, to split off in curved sheets that the builders exploited. They used fire and water to encourage this natural process, producing the curved stones that give Great Zimbabwe's walls their distinctive appearance. The Great Enclosure is the most impressive structure at the site. Its outer wall is about 250 meters in circumference and reaches a height of nearly 10 meters in places. The wall is over 5 meters thick at the base, tapering as it rises. The total volume of stone in this single structure has been estimated at 15,000 cubic meters. Inside the Great Enclosure stands a conical tower, solid and without any apparent purpose as a building. This tower, about 10 meters tall, has puzzled visitors and scholars alike. Its function remains uncertain. It may have had religious significance, may have served as a symbol of royal power, or may have had purposes we simply cannot recover. The development of Great Zimbabwe took place over several centuries. The earliest significant stone construction dates to around the 11th century CE. The site grew gradually, with new structures added over time, reaching its peak in the 14th and 15th centuries. By the 16th century, the site was in decline, eventually being abandoned. At its height, Great Zimbabwe may have housed between 10,000 and 20,000 people. Most of these would not have lived within the stone walls. Those were reserved for the elite, for religious specialists, and for certain specialized activities. The common people lived in traditional houses of wood and thatch scattered around the stone structures. The society that built Great Zimbabwe was highly stratified. At the top stood the king, whose power was both political and religious. Below the king were nobles who controlled territory, commanded followers, and participated in the lucrative trade. Commoners farmed, herded cattle, and provided labor for construction and other projects. At the bottom were servants and slaves. Cattle were central to this society, as they were throughout southern Africa. The accumulation of cattle marked wealth and status. Cattle were used in religious rituals, in marriage negotiations, in political relationships. The ability to accumulate large herds depended on having followers who could care for them, creating connections between cattle wealth and political power. Religion at Great Zimbabwe centered on a cult of ancestors, particularly royal ancestors. The spirits of deceased kings were believed to continue influencing the living world. Ritual specialists communicated with these spirits, interpreting their wishes and conveying messages between the living and the dead. The famous Zimbabwe bird stone sculptures of birds perched on tall pillars appear to have had religious significance, perhaps representing royal ancestors or messengers between the human and spirit worlds. Several of these birds have been found at Great Zimbabwe, and one has become the national symbol of modern Zimbabwe. But what made Great Zimbabwe wealthy? The answer, as with so much of African history, is trade, particularly the gold trade. The region around Great Zimbabwe contained gold deposits that could be worked with relatively simple technology. This gold was traded through networks that eventually connected to the Indian Ocean coast. Gold was not abundant at Great Zimbabwe itself, but the rulers controlled territories where gold was mined and the routes along which gold traveled. By positioning themselves as intermediaries between the miners and the coastal traders, Great Zimbabwe's rulers could extract wealth from both ends of the trade. Archaeological evidence confirms Great Zimbabwe's connections to Indian Ocean trade. Chinese porcelain, dating from the 14th and 15th centuries, has been found at the site. Glass beads from India and the Middle East are common in the ruins. Coral from the coast, too far inland to have arrived by accident, must have been deliberately transported as a trade good. These imported goods demonstrate that Great Zimbabwe was not isolated, but connected to networks spanning continents. The people who lived there could acquire luxuries from China, India, and Arabia. They participated in a global economy, even if they never traveled to those distant lands themselves. The decline of Great Zimbabwe in the 15th and 16th centuries remains not fully explained. Environmental degradation, deforestation, soil exhaustion may have played a role. Political conflicts, perhaps succession disputes, may have weakened the center. Shifts in trade routes may have reduced the economic base. When the Portuguese arrived in the region, they found not a single powerful kingdom, but multiple successor states, each claiming descent from Great Zimbabwe's tradition, each controlling portions of the former empire's territory. The stone city itself was largely abandoned, a monument to past greatness rather than a living capital. Yet the legacy of Great Zimbabwe lived on. Successor states, including the Rozwi Empire, continued to build in stone, maintaining traditions that stretched back centuries. The memory of the great city persisted in oral traditions, and the ruins themselves remained, weathering the centuries, waiting to be rediscovered and celebrated. Let the image of these great walls settle into your consciousness, dear listener. Stone fitted to stone without mortar, rising from the African earth, proclaiming the skill and ambition of those who built them. Great Zimbabwe stands as testimony to African achievement, a monument that no amount of denial could erase. As Great Zimbabwe declined, other powers rose to inherit its traditions and its trade. The most famous of these successor states was the kingdom known to the Portuguese as Monomatapa, whose rulers claimed descent from the builders of Great Zimbabwe and controlled much of the gold trade that had made the stone city wealthy. The name Monomatapa is a Portuguese rendering of a Shona royal title Mwene Mutapa, meaning something like Lord of the Plundered Lands or Lord of the Conquered. This title was borne by rulers of a state that emerged in the 15th century as Great Zimbabwe's power waned, and that would persist in various forms for several centuries. The origins of the Mwene Mutapa dynasty are traced by tradition to a warrior named Nyatsimba Mutauta, who may have been a prince of Great Zimbabwe or a powerful subordinate who broke away to found his own kingdom. Mutauta and his successors expanded northward toward the Zambezi River, conquering territory and establishing control over gold-producing regions. By the time Portuguese traders arrived in the early 16th century, Monomatapa was the dominant power in the region. The Portuguese were deeply interested in this kingdom, which controlled access to the gold they so desperately sought. They sent embassies to the Mwene Mutapa's court, established trading posts on the edges of his territory, and maneuvered to gain influence over the gold trade. The kingdom the Portuguese encountered was impressively organized. The Mwene Mutapa ruled over a hierarchy of subordinate chiefs, each responsible for territory and obligated to provide tribute and military service. The capital, which moved periodically, was a substantial settlement with elaborate royal enclosures, though apparently not built of stone like Great Zimbabwe. The Portuguese accounts of Monomatapa, though filtered through European preconceptions, provide valuable information about the kingdom. They describe a powerful king surrounded by ritual and ceremony, wielding authority over life and death. They describe an economy based on agriculture, cattle, and gold mining. They describe trade networks linking the interior to the coast. Gold mining in Monomatapa territory was conducted by commoners during the agricultural off-season. The miners dug shafts into gold-bearing rock, following the veins as deep as they safely could. The ore was crushed, washed, and the gold collected. This gold was then traded to the Portuguese or to other merchants, eventually reaching markets around the Indian Ocean. The Portuguese were never satisfied with merely trading for gold. They wanted to control the source. Throughout the 16th and 17th centuries, they sought to expand their influence over Monomatapa, sometimes through diplomacy, sometimes through force. They established Pharaoh's trading posts in the interior, built forts to protect their interests, and intervened in succession disputes when they thought it would benefit them. This Portuguese pressure had complex effects on Monomatapa. On one hand, the kingdom lost some autonomy, and some rulers became virtual puppets of Portuguese interests. On the other hand, Monomatapa rulers sometimes successfully played Portuguese factions against each other, or used Portuguese military support to defeat domestic rivals. The kingdom's relationship with traditional religion remained strong despite Portuguese missionary efforts. The Mwene Mutapa continued to perform rituals connected to royal ancestors and spiritual forces. These rituals were believed to ensure the prosperity of the kingdom, the fertility of the land, and the success of the ruler. Portuguese missionaries made some converts, but traditional beliefs persisted. Women played important roles in Monomatapa's political system. The great wife of the Mwene Mutapa held a title and position of her own. The king's mother and sisters exercised influence over succession and policy. Some accounts suggest that certain territories were governed by female relatives of the king. By the late 17th century, Monomatapa had weakened significantly. Portuguese interference, internal conflicts, and the rise of rival states all contributed to its decline. The Rozwe Empire, emerging to the south, eventually conquered much of Monomatapa's territory, reducing the once great kingdom to a shadow of its former self. Yet the Mwene Mutapa title persisted. Rulers continued to claim it well into the 19th century, even as their actual power dwindled. The memory of past greatness sustained the institution long after the reality had faded. The Rozwe Empire, which supplanted Monomatapa, represented a new phase in southern African history. The Rozwe, led by rulers bearing the title Changamire, built their own stone structures in the Great Zimbabwe tradition. Sites like Kami and Nalitale show continued skill in dry stone construction, even as political power shifted. The Razwi period, from the late 17th to the early 19th century, represents the last flowering of the Zimbabwe tradition. Razwi rulers controlled much of the Zimbabwe plateau, maintained the gold trade, and built impressive structures. But their empire, too, would eventually fall not to Portuguese pressure, but to African invaders from the south. The Mfecane, or crushing, of the early 19th century brought waves of disruption and warfare across southern Africa. Peoples displaced by the expansion of the Zulu kingdom, under Shaka raided northward, eventually reaching the Zimbabwe plateau. The Razwi Empire, already weakened by internal conflicts, could not resist these invasions. By the mid-19th century, the Zimbabwe tradition had effectively ended. The stone building skills were lost, the political structures had collapsed, the trade networks that had sustained the region were disrupted. When European colonizers arrived later in the century, they found ruins and memories, not living kingdoms. Yet the legacy of Zimbabwe persisted in other ways. The people of the region maintained oral traditions about their past. The stone ruins, though their builders were denied by racist colonizers, stood as undeniable evidence of achievement. And in the 20th century, as African peoples fought for independence, the name Zimbabwe became a rallying cry, a symbol of African civilization that could not be erased. Modern Zimbabwe takes its name from these ruins, claiming the legacy of the stone builders as part of its national identity. The Zimbabwe bird, taken from the sculptures found at Great Zimbabwe, appears on the national flag and coat of arms. The ancient and the modern are linked in a continuous story of African achievement and resilience. Before Great Zimbabwe reached its peak, another kingdom flourished further south, in the region where modern South Africa, Botswana and Zimbabwe meet. This kingdom, centered on a hill called Mapungubwe, represents an earlier chapter in the story of southern African civilization, and it held treasures that would amaze the modern world. Mapungubwe was discovered, in archaeological terms, in 1933, when a local farmer showed a strange hilltop site to a young South African archaeologist. What was found there transformed understanding of Southern African history, though the full implications would take decades to appreciate. The site of Mapungubwe is dominated by a flat-topped sandstone hill, its sides nearly vertical, accessible only by a narrow cleft in the rock. This natural fortress had been chosen by ancient rulers as their capital, and on its summit they had constructed stone walls, residences, and most remarkably burials containing golden objects. The golden rhinoceros of Mapungubwe, found in a royal burial, is perhaps the most famous single artifact from ancient southern Africa. This small sculpture, made of gold foil over a wooden core, depicts a rhinoceros with touching accuracy. It was buried with a ruler who died around 1200 CE, placed beside other golden objects as treasures for the afterlife. Other golden objects from Mapungubwe include a golden bowl, golden scepter, and golden beads, a collection demonstrating both wealth and sophisticated metalworking skills. The people of Mapungubwe had access to gold, the knowledge to work it, and a society that valued golden objects as markers of the highest status. Mapungubwe flourished from about 1075 to 1220 CE, making it roughly contemporary with the early stages of Great Zimbabwe. Archaeological evidence suggests that it was the first complex society in southern Africa to practice social stratification on a large scale, with a ruling elite living on the hilltop, commoners in the valley below, and clear distinctions of wealth and status throughout society. The economy of Mapungubwe was based on cattle, agriculture, and trade. The region's location, where the Shash and Limpopo rivers meet, provided water in an otherwise dry landscape. Farmers grew sorghum and other crops, herders managed cattle that represented both wealth and sustenance. But it was trade that brought the gold that made Mapungubwe's rulers wealthy. Like Great Zimbabwe after it, Mapungubwe participated in Indian Ocean trade networks. Glass beads from distant lands have been found at the site, evidence of commerce stretching to the coast. Gold, ivory, and other goods flowed outward, imported luxuries flowed in. The rulers of Mapungubwe positioned themselves to profit from this exchange. The relationship between Mapungubwe and Great Zimbabwe remains debated. Some scholars see Great Zimbabwe as a direct successor to Mapungubwe, with people and power shifting northward as Mapungubwe declined. Others view the two as parallel developments, similar societies arising independently in similar conditions. The archaeological evidence does not yet allow definitive conclusions. What is clear is that Mapungubwe declined in the early 13th century, around the time that Great Zimbabwe was beginning its rise. Climate change may have played a role. Evidence suggests that the region became drier during this period, making agriculture and cattle keeping more difficult. The shift of trade routes northward may also have contributed, redirecting the commerce that had supported Mapungubwe's elite. When Mapungubwe was abandoned, its hilltop was left as a sacred space, avoided by later peoples who retained memories of its significance. This avoidance, ironically, helped preserve the site for modern archaeologists, protecting it from disturbance and destruction. The discovery of Mapungubwe was politically sensitive in apartheid South Africa. The evidence of sophisticated African civilization, with golden treasures rivaling anything from medieval Europe, challenged the racist ideologies that justified white minority rule. For decades, the site was kept quiet, its significance downplayed, its treasures hidden from public view. Only after the end of apartheid did Mapungubwe receive the recognition it deserved. In 2003, the site was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The golden rhinoceros has become a symbol of South African heritage, featured on the country's highest civilian honor. What was once hidden is now celebrated. The story of Mapungubwe reminds us that Great Zimbabwe was not an isolated phenomenon. Southern Africa had a long history of complex societies, trading connections, and political centralization. Mapungubwe was part of this history, an early flowering that helped prepare the ground for what followed. It also reminds us of how much remains to be discovered. Mapungubwe was unknown to scholarship until 1933. What other sites await discovery? The history of Africa continues to be uncovered, each new discovery adding to our understanding of the continent's rich past. Let the image of that golden rhinoceros, gleaming in an ancient burial, stay with you as sleep approaches. A small object, but profound in what it represents: the skill, the wealth, the ambition of peoples long gone but not forgotten. Throughout our journey tonight, we have seen that African civilizations were not isolated entities, but participants in networks of trade, communication, and cultural exchange that spanned continents. This connectedness is essential to understanding African history and to understanding world history more broadly. The trans-Saharan trade routes linked West Africa to the Mediterranean world for over 1,000 years. Gold, salt, slaves, and ideas moved along these routes, creating relationships that shaped both sides of the desert. North African and European economies depended on West African gold. West African cities received technologies, religions, and cultural influences from the north. The Indian Ocean trade networks connected East Africa to Arabia, Persia, India, and China. Ships carrying goods and passengers crossed these waters with the monsoon winds, creating a maritime world that was thoroughly cosmopolitan. African ports were part of this world, contributing their own products and receiving goods from distant lands. These connections meant that African history cannot be understood in isolation. The wealth of medieval Mali affected the economies of Egypt and beyond. The demand for gold in India influenced mining practices in Zimbabwe. The spread of Islam across North Africa eventually transformed West African societies. Africans were not passive recipients of outside influence, but active participants in shaping the wider world. African knowledge and innovations also traveled outward along these networks. Agricultural techniques, artistic styles, musical forms, philosophical ideas, all these moved from Africa to other regions, though this diffusion is often less recognized than the flow in the other direction. The contributions of African peoples to human civilization extend far beyond Africa's borders. The relationships between African kingdoms and outside powers were complex and varied. Sometimes they were relationships of equals. The Mansa of Mali addressed the Sultan of Morocco as a fellow ruler, exchanging ambassadors and gifts. Sometimes they involved significant power imbalances. The Portuguese intervention in Congo eventually undermined the kingdom's independence. The variety of these relationships defies simple generalization. religion played a crucial role in these connections. Islam, spreading along trade routes, transformed societies across West and East Africa. Christianity, brought by missionaries and sometimes by choice, created new religious communities. These religions connected African peoples to wider communities of faith, while also being adapted to local conditions and beliefs. The intellectual connections were equally significant. African scholars studied in Cairo, Morocco, and other centers of Islamic learning. Scholars from those regions came to study in Timbuktu and other African cities. Books circulated across these networks, carrying ideas that were debated, adopted, modified, or rejected as they traveled. We should not romanticize these connections. Trade routes also carried the slave trade, that great tragedy that saw millions of Africans forcibly removed from their homes. The same networks that spread knowledge and luxury goods also spread disease, violence, and exploitation. The history of Africa's connections to the wider world includes both achievements and atrocities. European involvement in Africa intensified from the 15th century onward, bringing new pressures and new possibilities. The Portuguese, seeking to bypass Muslim intermediaries and access African gold directly, established trading posts along the coast. Other European powers followed, competing for access to African resources and labor. The Atlantic slave trade, which began in the 15th century and reached its peak in the 18th, transformed African societies in ways that are still being understood. Millions of people were taken, economies were reshaped, wars were fought for captives to sell. The effects of this catastrophe extend to the present day. Yet even during the era of the slave trade, African kingdoms maintained agency and pursued their own interests. Some rulers profited from the trade, others resisted it, most navigated as best they could in a world where the demand for slaves seemed insatiable. Africans were not merely victims but actors, making choices, sometimes terrible choices in difficult circumstances. The colonial partition of Africa in the late 19th century brought direct European rule to most of the continent. The kingdoms we have discussed tonight, Ghana, Mali, Songhai, Congo, Zimbabwe, and others, were incorporated into European empires, their boundaries redrawn, their rulers subordinated or replaced. A chapter of African history ended, a new and painful chapter began, but the memory of pre-colonial achievement persisted. African nationalists, fighting for independence in the 20th century, drew on this history for inspiration. The name Ghana, chosen by Kwame Nkrumah for his newly independent nation, consciously evoked the medieval kingdom's glory. Zimbabwe's name directly references the Great Stone City. Mali, Benin, and other modern nations similarly connect themselves to pre-colonial predecessors. This historical consciousness was and is politically significant. If Africa had great civilizations before colonialism, then African peoples were clearly capable of governing themselves. The colonialists' claims of bringing civilization to the dark continent were exposed as lies. History became a weapon in the struggle for freedom. The study of African history has expanded enormously since independence. African and non-African scholars have collaborated to uncover, interpret, and disseminate knowledge about Africa's past. Archaeological excavations, linguistic analysis, study of oral traditions, and examination of written sources have all contributed to a richer understanding. Yet much remains to be learned. Vast areas of African history are still poorly documented. Archaeological sites await discovery. Oral traditions continue to be collected. The history of Africa is still being written, and each generation adds new chapters to the story. As you rest tonight, dear listener, carry with you an awareness of these connections. Africa was never isolated, never cut off from the currents of world history. Its peoples traded, traveled, learned, and taught across vast distances. Understanding Africa means understanding the world, and understanding the world means understanding Africa. The civilizations we have discussed tonight were parts of larger wholes, connected to networks that spanned the known world. They deserve to be studied, not as curiosities or exceptions, but as integral parts of human history. Throughout our journey, we have touched on the religious and spiritual practices of African peoples. Now let us give these traditions the attention they deserve, for they represent some of humanity's most profound reflections on existence, meaning, and the divine. African spiritual traditions are extraordinarily diverse, reflecting the diversity of African peoples and environments. Yet certain common themes appear across the continent, themes that suggest shared ways of understanding the relationship between humans, nature, and the spiritual world. One such theme is the importance of ancestors. Across Africa, the dead are not simply gone, they remain present, watching over their descendants, influencing events in the living world. Ancestor veneration, the practice of honoring, communicating with, and seeking assistance from deceased relatives, is found in virtually every African society. This belief in active ancestors has practical implications. If the dead can help or harm the living, then maintaining proper relationships with them becomes essential. Rituals must be performed, offerings made, proper conduct maintained. The living are accountable not only to each other, but to generations past. Ancestor veneration also provides continuity across generations. The wisdom of the past is not lost when an elder dies, it remains accessible through spiritual communication. The community extends backward in time, linking the living to all who came before. Another common theme is the concept of a supreme deity, a high God who created the world and set its laws. This deity is often understood as distant, not directly involved in daily affairs, having delegated responsibility to lesser spirits and ancestors. Different peoples call this supreme being by different names and conceive of its nature in different ways, but the basic concept appears widely. Between the high God and humanity stand various spiritual beings, nature spirits associated with particular places, divinities who embody particular forces or activities, spirits who may be helpful or dangerous depending on circumstances. These beings are more immediately accessible than the high God, more likely to be the focus of daily religious practice. Nature in African spirituality is not mere inert matter but alive with spiritual presence. Mountains, rivers, trees, and animals may all be associated with spiritual forces. The land itself may be sacred, requiring proper treatment by those who live on it. This spiritual ecology encourages respect for the natural world, though it does not prevent exploitation when circumstances demand. Ritual specialists, priests, diviners, healers, mediums play important roles in African religious life. These individuals have special knowledge or abilities that allow them to communicate with the spiritual world, interpret signs and omens, heal illness, and maintain the proper relationships between seen and unseen realms. Divination, the practice of seeking hidden knowledge through supernatural means, is widespread in Africa. Various methods are used: reading patterns in thrown objects, interpreting animal behavior, entering trance states, and many others. Divination provides guidance in difficult decisions, reveals hidden causes of misfortune, and connects humans to the wisdom of the spiritual world. Healing in African traditions often combines physical remedies with spiritual treatment. Illness may be understood as having spiritual causes: the anger of ancestors, the malevolence of witches, the violation of taboos. Treatment therefore addresses both physical symptoms and spiritual conditions, seeking to restore balance in both realms. The coming of Islam and Christianity transformed African religious landscapes, but the transformation was complex. Rather than simple replacement, new religions often blended with existing practices, creating distinctive African forms of Islam and Christianity that incorporated traditional elements. African Islam, as practiced in West Africa and the Swahili coast, incorporated local customs, respected local spiritual beings alongside Allah, and adapted Islamic law to African conditions. Reformist movements periodically challenged these accommodations, seeking to purify practice, but the pull of local tradition remained strong. African Christianity similarly developed distinctive forms. The Kingdom of Congo adopted Catholicism in the 15th century, but Congolese Christianity incorporated traditional beliefs about ancestors, spirits, and sacred objects. Ethiopian Christianity, with roots stretching back to the 4th century, developed independently of European churches, creating its own liturgy, art, and theology. These religious syntheses demonstrate African creativity in the spiritual realm. Africans were not passive recipients of outside religions but active creators, adapting new faiths to fit their own understandings and needs. The result was religious traditions that were authentically both African and Islamic or Christian. Philosophy, in the formal sense of systematic reflection on fundamental questions, also has African traditions. While much African philosophy was oral rather than written, it addressed the same questions that occupied philosophers elsewhere. What is the nature of reality? What is a good life? What is justice? How should society be organized? Ubuntu, a concept found in various forms across southern Africa, provides one example of African philosophical thought. Usually translated as "I am because we are," Ubuntu emphasizes the interconnectedness of human beings, the importance of community, and the responsibility of individuals to each other. This philosophy has gained international attention, influencing discussions of ethics and social organization beyond Africa. The study of African philosophy has expanded in recent decades, as scholars have worked to recover, interpret, and develop African philosophical traditions. This work challenges the assumption that philosophy is a uniquely European or Western enterprise and reveals the depth and sophistication of African thought. As sleep approaches, dear listener, let these reflections on African spirituality and philosophy accompany you. The peoples whose histories we have explored tonight were not merely builders and traders but thinkers and seekers, grappling with the deepest questions of human existence. Their wisdom deserves attention and respect. The artistic achievements of African civilizations are among the most remarkable in human history. From the terracotta sculptures of Nok to the bronze castings of Benin, from the rock art of the Sahara to the textile traditions of West Africa, African artists have created works that astonish with their beauty and sophistication. African art served many purposes beyond mere decoration. Religious objects facilitated communication with spiritual beings. Royal regalia proclaimed the power and legitimacy of rulers. Personal adornments marked identity, status, and life stage. Art was woven into the fabric of daily life, inseparable from the social, religious, and political functions it served. The sculpture traditions of West Africa have received particular attention from scholars and collectors. The Nok culture of central Nigeria, flourishing from around 500 BCE to 200 CE, produced terracotta figures with distinctive stylized features. These sculptures, the earliest known figurative art from sub-Saharan Africa, demonstrate sophisticated technical skills and developed aesthetic conventions. The bronze sculptures of Ife and Benin represent, perhaps, the highest achievement of African sculptural art. The Ife heads, dating from the 12th to 15th centuries, depict individuals with remarkable naturalism, so much so that early European observers could not believe they were African work. The Benin bronzes, produced for the royal court from the 15th century onward, show extraordinary technical mastery and artistic refinement. When British forces sacked Benin City in 1897, they were amazed by the bronzes they found. These were clearly works of great art, yet they came from a society the British regarded as primitive. The contradiction between racist assumptions and artistic evidence was stark, though it took decades for the implications to be fully acknowledged. African textile traditions are equally impressive. The Kent cloth of the Akan peoples, with its complex patterns and vibrant colors, has become internationally recognized. The indigo-dyed cloth of Hausaland was traded across the Sahara. The bark cloth of Central Africa, the raffia textiles of the Congo, the silk cotton products of various regions all represent sophisticated textile arts. Textile production was often gender divided, with men and women specializing in different techniques or stages of production. The patterns woven into cloth often carried meaning, signifying status, identity, proverb, or occasion. Cloth was not merely functional but communicative, carrying messages that could be read by those who knew the conventions. Architecture, too, represents African artistic achievement. The mud brick buildings of the Sahel, including the great mosques of Djenné and Timbuktu, show how local materials can be used to create monumental and beautiful structures. The stone buildings of Great Zimbabwe and related sites demonstrate mastery of dry stone construction. The traditional houses of various peoples, adapted to local climates and materials, represent practical artistry. Music and dance were and are central to African cultural life. Every significant occasion, birth, initiation, marriage, death, harvest, worship, had its appropriate music. Musical traditions were preserved and developed by specialists, whose training might take years and whose skills were highly valued. African musical instruments show great variety and ingenuity. Drums of many types, some capable of transmitting complex messages over long distances. Stringed instruments like the kora, whose 21 strings can produce sounds of extraordinary beauty. Wind instruments, including flutes and horns. Percussion instruments of endless variety. The human voice, trained for traditional songs that preserved history, celebrated achievements, and commented on current events. The griots of West Africa, mentioned earlier in our journey, represent a distinctive African cultural tradition. These professional musicians, historians, and storytellers preserved and transmitted knowledge across generations. Their songs could trace genealogies, recount historical events, praise patrons, or criticize wrongdoing. The griots were living libraries, carrying cultural knowledge in their memories. Dance in African traditions was not mere entertainment but served religious, social, and educational functions. Dances could invoke spiritual beings, celebrate life transitions, train warriors, reinforce social values, or simply bring communities together in shared movement. The elaboration and preservation of dance traditions required dedication and skill comparable to any artistic form. The visual arts, music, and dance were often combined in performances of great complexity. A royal ceremony might include sculptural displays, specially woven textiles, instrumental music, song, and dance, all coordinated to create overwhelming aesthetic and emotional effects. These performances demonstrated power, affirmed values, and bound communities together. African artistic traditions influenced the wider world, though this influence is not always acknowledged. African musical traditions, carried to the Americas by enslaved peoples, contributed to the development of blues, jazz, and other forms that have shaped global popular culture. African sculptural concepts influenced European modernism. African textiles have inspired designers worldwide. As you drift towards sleep, let the sounds of African music accompany you. Imagine the rhythms of drums, the plucked strings of the kora, the voices raised in song. These sounds have echoed across the continent for centuries, carrying stories and emotions that transcend time and place. As our journey draws to a close, let us reflect on what we have learned, not merely facts and dates, but broader lessons about human civilization, historical understanding, and our own place in the flow of time. The first lesson is about the diversity of human achievement. The civilizations we have explored tonight, Ghana, Mali, Songhai, Zimbabwe, Congo, and others, developed their own solutions to the challenges of human existence. They were not copies of other civilizations or failed attempts to achieve what others had achieved. They were original, creative responses to particular environments and circumstances. This diversity matters because it expands our understanding of what is humanly possible. If all civilizations had developed along the same lines, we might think there was only one path to prosperity and power. But the variety of African achievements shows that humans can create complex, prosperous, culturally rich societies in many different ways. The second lesson concerns the importance of trade and connection. Throughout our journey, we have seen that the most successful African civilizations were those that participated in wider networks of exchange. Ghana controlled the gold trade, Zimbabwe connected to Indian Ocean commerce, the Swahili cities were nodes in a maritime network spanning half the globe. Isolation, in African history as elsewhere, was a path to stagnation. Connection brought wealth, ideas, technologies, and stimuli for innovation. The civilizations that thrived were those that remained open to the wider world, while maintaining their own distinctive character. The third lesson is about the contingency of historical outcomes. The great empires we have discussed rose and fell based on circumstances that were not inevitable. Different decisions, different environmental conditions, different timing of contacts might have led to very different outcomes. This contingency should make us humble about the present. Our own civilization, whatever its achievements, is not the inevitable culmination of history, but one possible outcome among many. What seems permanent is always subject to change. What seems impossible may yet occur. The fourth lesson concerns the relationship between power and knowledge. The civilizations we have explored combined military and economic power with intellectual and cultural achievements. Mali was not merely wealthy but a center of learning. Zimbabwe was not merely powerful but artistically creative. Power without culture is mere brute force. Culture without power cannot sustain itself. The most enduring civilizations combined both. This lesson is relevant to our own time. Societies that invest only in military strength while neglecting education and culture may win battles but lose the longer struggle for meaning and purpose. The example of African civilizations suggests that true greatness requires attention to both the material and the spiritual dimensions of human existence. The fifth lesson is about resilience and adaptation. The civilizations we have discussed faced enormous challenges: environmental changes, invasions, epidemics, economic disruptions. Some collapsed under these pressures, others adapted and survived, sometimes in transformed forms. The Kanem-Bornu Empire, which survived for over a millennium, exemplifies this resilience. The dynasty that ruled it adapted to changing circumstances, moved its capital when necessary, adopted new technologies and religions, and found ways to maintain legitimacy across the centuries. Flexibility, not rigidity, was the key to survival. The sixth lesson concerns the complexity of moral judgment in history. The civilizations we have explored had achievements worthy of admiration and practices that we rightly condemn. They built great cities and practiced slavery. They patronized learning and conducted human sacrifice. They created beautiful art and waged devastating wars. We must learn to hold these contradictions together, neither sanitizing the past nor refusing to acknowledge its achievements. The capacity for both greatness and cruelty is part of the human condition. Recognizing this in the past may help us recognize it in ourselves. Finally, there is the lesson of historical memory itself. The civilizations we have discussed were nearly forgotten, dismissed by racist scholars, ignored in educational curricula, absent from popular awareness. The recovery of this history has been a work of generations, and it is not yet complete. This recovery matters because history shapes identity. People who know their history have a sense of where they come from, what their ancestors achieved, what is possible for them to achieve. The denial of African history was an attempt to deny African dignity and capability. The recovery of African history is an assertion that African peoples and their descendants have the same human potential as anyone else. As you approach sleep, dear listener, carry these lessons with you. They are not just about Africa, but about humanity, about what we are capable of, for good and ill, and about the many paths we have traveled and might yet travel. The past is not dead. It lives in us, in our customs and languages, our institutions and beliefs, our very bodies and minds. Understanding the past helps us understand ourselves. And understanding African history helps us understand a part of the human story too long neglected. Sleep now, if sleep is calling you. The journey continues in dreams, where the boundaries of time and place dissolve, where the great cities of the past may appear as vividly as the events of yesterday. The kings and scholars, traders and artists of ancient Africa are not truly gone. They live in their descendants, in their works, and in the memory of all who learn their stories. And so, dear listener, we come to the end of our journey through ancient Africa. We have traveled thousands of miles, crossed centuries of time, and encountered civilizations whose achievements deserve to be remembered alongside the greatest of any continent. From the golden empires of West Africa to the stone cities of the South, from the trading ports of the Swahili coast to the kingdoms of the Great Lakes, we have seen the breadth and depth of African civilization. These were not primitive societies awaiting the arrival of civilization from elsewhere. They were complex, sophisticated, creative societies that had developed their own solutions to the challenges of human life. The story does not end with the periods we have covered tonight. African history continues through the colonial period and into the present. Modern African nations grapple with the legacies of both pre-colonial achievement and colonial exploitation. The future remains to be written. But the past matters for that future. Knowing that African peoples built great civilizations provides a foundation for confidence and ambition. Knowing that Africans participated as equals in medieval global trade challenges narratives of inherent African inferiority. Knowing that African thinkers and artists produced works of profound sophistication demands respect. The civilizations we have discussed also offer lessons for the present. The environmental adaptations of traditional societies may inform modern responses to climate change. The governance systems of pre-colonial states may inspire new approaches to African politics. The artistic traditions provide sources for contemporary creativity. The descendants of the peoples we have discussed now number hundreds of millions not only in Africa, but throughout the diaspora created by the slave trade and later migrations. These descendant communities maintain connections to African heritage, adapt it to new circumstances, and contribute to its ongoing development. The history of Africa is not a closed book, but a living tradition. Each generation adds to it, reinterprets it, finds new meaning in it. The story we have told tonight is one telling among many possible tellings, one selection from an inexhaustible store of memory and meaning. As sleep embraces you, may you carry something of this story into your dreams. May the golden cities of Mali, the stone walls of Zimbabwe, the scholarly streets of Timbuktu appear in your sleeping mind. May the kings and traders, scholars and artists of ancient Africa visit you in the realm of dreams. And may you wake with a renewed sense of human possibility of what our species can achieve when creativity, ambition, and favorable circumstances combine. The past is full of wonders. The future may hold more. Thank you for journeying with us tonight through the kingdoms of gold and the stone cities of ancient Africa. May your sleep be peaceful, may your dreams be rich, and may you wake restored. Good night, dear listener. The story continues even as you rest.